Welcome to another quiet journey here on Boring History for Sleep. Tonight, we'll be riding alongside the Mongols across the cold grasslands of Central Asia. You've probably heard their name before, maybe from old school books or dramatic shows filled with swords and fire. But this won't be a story about war cries or battles. Not really. This is a softer, slower story about the people behind the history, about their days, their routines, their worries, and their strange, quiet moments in between the thunder. If you're lying in bed, let yourself get comfortable. Close your eyes if you'd like. Let the world around you fade just a little. You're going to visit a place with no buildings, no roads, no phones, just wide open land stretching in every direction. You'll hear the sound of horses breathing in the cold. You'll smell smoke from a cooking fire, mixed with damp wool and dry grass. This was life for a Mongol herder or a soldier or a child riding bareback long before they learned to write their name. Life in a Mongol horde wasn't filled with glory. It was cold. It was hungry. It was full of small chores and constant movement. People didn't settle down. They didn't build stone homes or plant big gardens. Instead, they followed the herds, trusted the seasons, and packed up everything they owned onto a cart when it was time to move again. In this story, we'll explore what it felt like to live like that. To wake up under the cold sky, to eat what was available, not what was wanted, to obey a leader without question, and to keep riding even when your legs ached from days in the saddle. We'll talk about their food, their battles, their laws, their legends, and their quiet evenings in thick felt tents. So let's begin where every Mongol day began early, before the sun had a chance to rise, with frost on the ground and horses stirring in the dark. The first sound is the wind. It moves low and steady across the open grass, brushing over short brown stalks and picking up flecks of dust. Then comes the rustle of felt, thick and stiff with cold, as someone pulls back the flap of a yurt. A sharp breath is taken. It's cold, sharp enough to bite your nose. The sky is still dark. There's no warmth from the sun yet, only a faint bluish glow over the distant hills. A Mongol camp is quiet in the early hours. Not silent, but quiet in a way that feels shared. People move slowly. No one yells. There's no sudden rush. Just a rhythm. Someone soaks a fire. Someone pours water into a pot. Someone walks past with a bridle over their shoulder, heading toward the horse line. You hear the soft thump of hooves on frozen dirt and the low, wet snort of a half-sleeping stallion. Inside the yurts, families are packing. Blankets are folded and tied with strips of leather. Baskets are closed. A saddlebag gets pulled shut with a strong tug. This happens over and over in dozens of tents at once, like a quiet dance everyone knows by heart. There's no written schedule, no order shouted out, just the shared understanding that it's time to move. The yurts themselves, called gers by some, come apart surprisingly fast. They're built to be temporary, after all. A wooden lattice folds inward. The felt covering is peeled away. A central pole comes down with care, and then suddenly the whole thing is gone. In its place is just flat grass. Maybe a circle of trampled earth the fire pit had been. Children help too. A boy no older than 10 leads a small ox toward a cart. A girl a little younger ties a bundle of wool blankets with practiced hands. No one is spared from work, no matter how young. They've grown up in this rhythm and the constant packing and moving. For them, this is normal. The carts are packed next, some pulled by oxen, others by yaks or sturdy ponies. There are no spare belongings. Every item matters: a kettle, a sack of dried milk curds, a piece of harness. The cradle board for a baby. These are not people who carry luxury. They carry what they need, and only what they need. Soon, the sun starts to edge above the land. It doesn't warm much, but it changes the light. The colors of the steppe show themselves faded yellow, dry brown, dusty gray. Far away, a herd of goats shifts, rising to follow a shepherd. The animals are everything to the Mongols. Their milk, their meat, their clothing, their warmth. Without the herd, there is no life. Then comes the sound of hooves again, but this time it's dozens at once. A group of riders is ready. They sit tall, wrapped in thick coats, some made of sheepskin, some of felt. Their faces are wind-burned and quiet. They speak in short phrases, often in low tones. Each carries a bow. Each knows the direction they'll travel next, even if it hasn't been said out loud. This camp will be empty in less than an hour. It will look as though no one was ever there. The grass will still carry the shape of a circle, and the ashes from a fire might be found by someone with sharp eyes. But for the most part, the land returns to itself, flat, open, endlessly wide. The people are already moving. They fall into a long line across the steppe, carts groaning softly, horses flicking their tails, dogs weaving through legs. The sky overhead is big, far too big to measure. It's easy to feel small here. Even the largest man becomes just a figure on the horizon, swallowed by space and sky. For the Mongols, this movement is not unusual. It is the rhythm of their lives. Always breaking down and building back up. Always chasing grass, chasing weather, chasing the horizon. They do not look back. There is no point. Everything they need is carried with them, and everything they left behind was temporary anyway. But if you had to live this life for a single day, you'd feel it deep in your bones. The cold that doesn't leave your fingers. The ache in your legs from riding. The dull hunger in your stomach that doesn't quite go away. You feel the silence too. Not peace, exactly. Just the kind of quiet that makes you realize how far you are from anything else. And how quickly things change out here. This was just the beginning of the day. And already you'd be tired. And still, the day has barely begun. The sun has climbed just enough to light the land in pale gold, casting long shadows beneath the moving line of carts and horses. The riders keep their eyes forward. They speak little. But children, even the youngest, sit quietly unless told otherwise. Everyone knows their role, and that's what keeps the horde moving habit. Rhythm, and a shared understanding that pausing too long in one place invites risk. As the caravan stretches out, the air starts to shift. It warms, but only slightly. Enough to melt the frost on the grass and loosen the breath in your chest. A few people begin to sing, not loudly, not for joy, but softly under their breath. Mongol songs are often slow and low, the kind that ride easily with the wind. Sometimes they're about old stories, sometimes about horses. Sometimes they don't seem to have words at all, just a hum that carries over the land. If you were among them, you might think of asking where you're headed, but no one would give you a straight answer. That's not how this life works. They move not toward a destination, but away from emptiness. They follow where the herds can graze, where the water still runs, where the weather feels just survivable. And sometimes where the Khan has ordered them to go, the Khan's words matter more than maps. A messenger might have ridden into camp the night before, carrying news or orders. The contents of that message wouldn't be debated. It would be obeyed. That's how things work in the Horde. The power flows from the top down, and you don't question it. You ride when told to ride. You pack when told to pack. You trust a direction, even if it leads somewhere you don't recognize. Around midday, the line might pause. Not to rest, but to regroup. Riders dismount. Water is shared between people and horses. A bit of dried meat is chewed slowly, not for pleasure, but to push back the hunger. There's no real lunch, just small moments like this. A shared skin of milk. A few hard biscuits soaked in broth. A piece of cheese too sharp to enjoy, but filling enough to matter. Rest doesn't last long. The carts creak back into motion, and the riders swing back onto their saddles. For those not used to it, the saddle begins to feel like punishment. Mongol saddles are high and wooden, built for control, not comfort. Your thighs burn, your back stiffens, but the Mongols barely notice. They've been riding since they could walk. A horse to them is not a tool. It's an extension of the body. It's survival in 4 legs and thick breath. As the sun begins to dip, the search for a campsite begins. It has to be just right, not too exposed. Close enough to water, but not boggy. With enough space to spread the tents, enough grazing for the animals, and enough visibility to see danger coming. Scouts fan out first. The others wait, listening for a shout or a horn that will signal it's safe. When the call finally comes, the line turns. The carts pull into a clearing and the work begins again. Everything that was packed up this morning is unpacked once more. The felt is stretched. The frames go up. Fires are built, flickering in shallow pits dug to shield the flames from wind. It's all done fast, but not carelessly. You can tell they've done this hundreds of times, maybe thousands. Children gathered dry dung for fuel. It's not pleasant, but it burns steady. Water is boiled. Some of the animals are tied near the camp. Others left to graze with hobbles so they can't wander far. The sky turns from gold to gray, then deepens into dark blue. Stars begin to appear, sharp and clean. The air turns cold again, and people draw in closer to the fires. Supper is plain. A stew of mutton and onion, or maybe just some boiled millet. The same food as the night before, and likely the same food tomorrow. Mongols eat what keeps them alive, not what pleases the tongue. There are no spices, no sweet sauces, no desserts. Just heat, fat, and salt. But after a long day of riding, even this can feel like comfort. As people finish eating, the camp grows quieter. Some men sit polishing bows or checking the points of their arrows. Others tend to the animals. The women sew, patching up old coats or weaving strips of horsehair into rope. You can hear quiet conversations, low and soft, spoken in a language shaped by the wind and the land. There is laughter sometimes, but it doesn't carry far. It stays close to the fire, wrapped up in the night air. And then, one by one, the families retreat into their tents. A small oil lamp might flicker for a while, casting a warm circle of light onto a sleeping child or the rough wool of a saddlebag used as a pillow. But soon, even that fades. The fires die down. The wind picks up again, and the stars keep turning above, just as they always do. This is life in the Mongol Horde. No stone homes, no streets, no locked doors. Only movement, cold air, and the endless grass beneath your feet. Tomorrow the sun will rise again. The yurts will come down again. The carts will creak. The horses will stamp their feet. And the people will ride on just like they always have. If you lived this way for a day, you might be able to endure it. If you lived it for a week, the silence would start to get to you. A month, and your body would change. A year, and you'd never be the same again. Not softer, but harder. Not crueler, but quieter. The steppe has that effect. It doesn't care who you were before. It shapes you into someone who survives. For the Mongols, this was not a hardship. It was simply life. But for anyone used to roofs, walls, and the feeling of staying in one place, it would be almost unthinkable. You wouldn't last long. Not unless you gave yourself to it completely. The motion, the cold, the silence, and the sky that never ever ends. Let yourself drift now, imagining the wind brushing past your cheek, the creak of a wooden cart nearby, and the low breath of a pony standing just outside the tent flap. The day is over, but the road stretches on. Chapter 2. The Bone-Chilling Mongol Diet. Imagine waking up on the open steppe with your stomach already aching. Not from illness, but from the kind of hunger that feels old, like it's been passed down. Your last full meal might have been 2 nights ago. Yesterday, you only ate what you could carry in a leather pouch tied to your saddle. The cold air doesn't help. It burns more energy just to stay warm, and now your body is asking for more than you can give it. This was normal for the Mongol people. They didn't eat by the clock or by appetite. They ate when food was available, and often it wasn't. Their diet came not from choice, but from necessity. It was a reflection of their land, a place without grain fields, without olive trees, without fruit orchards or vineyards. The steppe offered grass for animals, and through the animals came nearly everything else. At the center of every Mongol meal was meat. Not delicate cuts or tender slices, but dense, sinewy flesh from animals that worked as hard as the people who raised them. Mutton was the most common. Sheep were dependable, even in the worst weather. They grazed easily, traveled well, and reproduced quickly. When slaughtered, nothing was wasted. The meat was boiled in great pots. The fat was treasured. Even the bones were cracked open for marrow. Boiled meat might sound simple, but on the steppe, it was survival. Water and fire turned the toughest cuts into something edible. Salt, if they had it, was used sparingly. Most of the time, the flavor came from the animal itself. If there were onions, garlic, or herbs, they were added as rare treats, not staples. Most often, the broth was thick and greasy, meant to warm the body from the inside out. But meat alone didn't carry them. The Mongols relied heavily on dairy milk from horses, goats, yaks, and sheep. In the summer, when the animals produced more, milk was consumed fresh or used to make soft cheese and butter. In winter, it was stored in hardened curds or fermented into drinks. One of the most important was ereg, also known as fermented maize milk. Slightly sour, slightly alcoholic, and packed with nutrients, it was a symbol of Mongol life. Guests were offered ereg as a sign of respect. Warriors drank it before battle. Children were raised on it from the time they could walk. The process of making ereg was simple but labor-intensive. Fresh maize milk was collected, strained, and then stirred constantly in a leather bag until it began to ferment. The result was frothy, tart, and surprisingly refreshing. It wasn't to everyone's taste, especially outsiders, but for the Mongols, it was both food and culture. A taste of the land, passed down through generations. Cheese was another staple, but not the soft, creamy kind. Mongol cheese was hard, so hard, in fact, that it could break teeth if eaten too quickly. Dried in the sun and stored in cloth sacks, it could last for months. It was carried on long journeys, chewed slowly, and washed down with broth or ereg. Some varieties were sour, others bland, but all of them filled the stomach, which was what mattered most. In colder months, fat became essential. The Mongols prized fatty meats not just for taste, but for fuel. Horse meat was often reserved for special occasions, but when eaten, it provided thick, rich calories that kept the cold at bay. Fat was rendered into tallow and used in cooking, or even rubbed on the skin to prevent cracking from wind and frost. In times of famine, they turned to what they had: boiled bones, dried hides, or a thin gruel made from whatever grain or root they might trade for. Vegetables were rare. The steppe didn't grow many of them naturally, and farming was not a part of Mongol tradition. Carrots, onions, and garlic appeared only when traded from other regions, and even then were used carefully. Fresh greens were almost unheard of, especially in winter. This lack of variety meant that many Mongols grew up never tasting sweet fruit or leafy vegetables. Their bodies adapted, their stomachs toughened. But the diet left its mark. Occasionally, grains made an appearance. Barley or millet could be traded from Chinese or Persian merchants and ground into flour or boiled into porridge. But grain was unreliable. It didn't grow in the hard earth of the steppe, and storing it was difficult during constant travel. So when grains were available, they were used wisely. Some was cooked into flatbreads over open fires. Others were boiled into soups. Most often, they were stretched as far as they could go. Tea was another prized item. Not sweet, milky tea like we know today, but salty, savory tea made from bricks of dried leaves. A chunk would be broken off, boiled in water, and mixed with milk and salt. This created a broth-like drink that warmed the body and helped with digestion. Salted milk tea was often served in wooden cups and shared communally, a simple ritual that brought people together around the fire. There were also foods meant for travel. Dried curds, hard cheese, fat cakes, and strips of dried meat were packed into saddlebags. These weren't snacks in the modern sense. They were fuel-dense, greasy, and long-lasting. A warrior on horseback could chew a bit of dried meat while riding, wash it down with water or arag, and keep going for hours. Hunger was something to manage, not indulge. But even with these strategies, hunger never stayed far. Famine could strike at any time. A long winter, a disease among the herds, or a failed trade route could mean days or weeks of empty bellies. In those times, the Mongols turned to survival food-boiled hides, blood mixed with milk, or even scavenged roots. Eating became a quiet act, stripped of ceremony or comfort. Just a way to keep moving, to keep living. And still, despite the hardship, food had meaning. Meals were shared, even when small. Elders were given the best cuts. Guests were offered bowls of broth, no matter how little remained. Hospitality was not about luxury, but about dignity. To eat with someone, to hand them your food, was to recognize their place in your world. Even if that world was a cold, shifting one, filled with wind and hunger. This was the Mongol diet. Not a cuisine, but a system of survival. A way of living that came from the land and the sky and the needs of bodies that rode for days at a time. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't soft, but it kept them strong, kept them alive, and fed the people who would shape the world with hooves and arrows. It wasn't just what they ate that mattered, but how they treated food. The Mongols approached meals with a kind of quiet discipline. Waste was considered dangerous, not just rude. There was no scraping of plates or tossing of bones. Everything had a purpose, and nearly everything was used. Bones were boiled again for stock. Fat was collected and stored. Even the stomach lining and intestines of animals were cleaned, dried, and turned into tools or containers. The idea of excess didn't exist. Food was precious, and its value was woven into every step of daily life. There were taboos, too. Rules about what could and couldn't be eaten, not always because of religion, but often because of tradition or belief. Some families avoided fish, believing it brought bad luck. Others refused to eat dogs, even in times of desperation. Horses, while deeply respected, were still eaten in some regions, especially when age or injury made them no longer useful. But this was never done lightly. Eating a horse was not just about hunger. It was a decision weighed against loyalty, need, and survival. Food also reflected the Mongols' relationship with animals. Their animals were not kept behind fences or in tight pens. They roamed the open land, returning at night or when called. A Mongol herder knew his animals not by number, but by name, by sound, by movement. He could spot a limping goat from 100 paces or hear distress in the whinny of a mare. These animals were not just property. They were lifelines. When an animal was killed for food, it was done quickly, with care, and usually without wasteful ceremony. The slaughter itself was different from what many people today might imagine. The Mongols believed in causing as little suffering as possible, both for practical and spiritual reasons. A sheep or goat was laid gently on its back and with a swift motion, a vein near the chest was opened to let the blood drain inward rather than spilling onto the ground. This method was believed to keep the spirit calm, to honor the animal, and to preserve the meat longer in the cold. Blood, when collected, was sometimes used as food. Mixed with milk or broth, it became a dense, iron-rich drink during times of sickness or weakness. It wasn't common every day, but in winter, when supplies ran low, it could mean the difference between survival and death. Nothing was wasted, not even the life that had just ended. That was the unspoken rule of the steppe. Take only what you need, and respect what you take. Feasts were rare, but when they happened, they were memorable. During weddings, military victories, or visits from distant leaders, the camp would bring out its best. Whole animals were roasted over large fires. Bowls of arag were passed from hand to hand. There was music, low and rhythmic, played on stringed instruments made from horsehair. The feasts were not fancy, not filled with silver or delicate sauces, but they were warm, generous, and full of meaning. They reminded the people that even in a hard life, there were moments of joy. At the center of many of these gatherings sat the fire, not just a tool for heat or cooking, but a symbol of order and peace. The fire was treated with respect. No one stepped over it. No trash was thrown into it. It was fed carefully, watched constantly. Around it, food was shared, stories were told, and decisions were made. It was a place where even strangers could become familiar, simply by sitting close and passing a cup. Children were taught about food from a young age. Not just how to eat it, but how to find it, preserve it, and honor it. A child might be shown how to dry curds in the sun, how to churn milk into butter using a goatskin bag, or how to recognize the scent of spoiled meat long before it became dangerous. These skills were essential, not extras. Knowing how to preserve meat or boil a bone properly could one day mean keeping your family alive. Trade added occasional variety to their meals. Caravans from China, Persia, or Russia brought unfamiliar spices, grains, or dried fruits. Sometimes a Mongol family might trade wool or hides for a handful of rice or a pinch of cinnamon. These were not staples, but surprises. A stew might carry a whiff of something foreign, a flavor that stirred curiosity more than comfort. But even these things were used sparingly. A little went a long way, and novelty was never more important than sustenance. In the cities the Mongols later conquered, their diet began to change. Access to markets and settled agriculture introduced them to wheat bread, sugar, fruit, and more structured meals. Some Mongols embraced this change, while others resisted it, preferring the rough simplicity of the old ways. Even the great Khans kept herds near their palaces, ensuring that they could still drink fresh arag or roast mutton over open fires. Despite the conquests, despite the palaces, the steppe always called them back. And food was one of the strongest cords tying them to it. Eating, then, was more than survival, it was memory. It was identity. The smell of boiling meat, the taste of sour milk, the crackle of fat on fire, these were reminders of who they were and where they came from. You could take a Mongol warrior into a Persian banquet hall or a Chinese tea house, but if he didn't hear the creak of saddle leather or the bubbling of meat stew in a felt tent, something in him remained distant, detached, unfinished. Even now, in the farthest corners of Mongolia, you can still find families who eat like this, who herd goats across cold hills, boil tea with salt, and dry cheese in the sun. The recipes haven't changed much. The tools haven't either. Because when something works, when it truly keeps you alive, there's no need to make it beautiful or exciting. There's comfort in what is familiar, even when it's harsh. The Mongol diet was hard, yes, but it was honest. It told the truth about the land and the people. It didn't promise more than it could offer, and in its simplicity, it carried strength. A strength built from boiled bones, thick broth, sour milk, and the kind of hunger that never completely goes away. Let yourself settle now, imagining the low crackle of the fire, the steam rising from a rough wooden bowl, and the quiet satisfaction of a meal shared not for pleasure, but for the calm, steady promise of survival. Imagine being born into a world where your bed is the ground, your ceiling is a round felt roof, And your earliest memories are filled with the smell of wool, smoke, and horse sweat. There are no books, no classrooms, no playgrounds. The land is your teacher, and everything you need to know begins with how to ride. In a Mongol family, children were expected to grow up fast. From the moment they could stand, they were watched for signs of readiness. A toddler might wobble toward a grazing goat and be gently corrected, not with scolding, but with a nudge in the right direction. At age 2 or 3, a child might be put on a pony, not to ride on their own, but just to feel the animal's rhythm. The saddle would be high and wooden, padded with fur, tied tightly. It was not about comfort. It was about learning balance and trust. By the time a child reached 5 years old, riding solo was expected, not just in circles, not just for fun, but across open land, chasing goats, helping with herding, delivering messages between tents. They learn not from lessons, but from doing. You watched your older siblings, you watched your parents, and then one day you were told to take the reins and ride alone. No one clapped, no one cheered. It was simply the next step in becoming part of the group. Horses were everywhere. They were not pets, not even quiet animals in the way many think of them today. They were companions, vehicles, weapons, and sources of food. A child was taught to groom a horse, saddle it, check its hooves, sense when it was tired or sick. These were skills that couldn't be postponed until adolescence. A mistake could mean injury, or losing the herd, or being left behind. Weapons came next. A bow was often placed in a child's hands around age 6 or 7. It was small at first, made from willow and sinew, light enough to draw without effort. Arrows were blunt, used for practice, for chasing birds or scaring off dogs. But the form was strict. You were corrected if your stance was weak, if your draw was crooked. Hitting the mark mattered, even if the mark was a patch of fur hung from a pole. The bow was not taught as a hobby. It was part of survival. By 10, a child might be able to shoot while riding. Not perfectly, not with the power of an adult, but well enough to defend a herd or scare off predators. There was pride in this, but not celebration. You did it because you had to. Everyone did. And if you couldn't, you'd fall behind. Girls and boys were taught the same. There was no clear line between what a son learned and what a daughter did. Both rode. Both hunted. Both herded sheep and milked mares and patched torn felt. Strength and skill mattered more than gender. And in the tight quarters of a tent, with the wind howling outside, there was no room to sit idle. Still, not everything was work. Children laughed, told stories, made games out of chores. A popular one was a kind of ankle bone game. The small bones from sheep were cleaned and dried, then used like dice. Children tossed them into the air, trying to land them in certain positions. Some used them like marbles, knocking one another's pieces out of a circle drawn in the dirt. It was simple, but it kept the hands busy and the mind sharp. In quieter moments, a child might lie flat on the ground and watch the clouds drift, or run barefoot across soft grass when the weather turned warm. They didn't have toys in the modern sense, but a stick could become a sword. A saddlebag became a doll. Imagination filled the gaps where objects didn't exist. And when night came, stories were shared, not read aloud from pages, but told from memory, passed down through voices and firelight. The stories were about long rides, lost travelers, strange animals, or distant heroes. Some were true, some clearly made up, but all carried a lesson. Work hard, stay alert, respect your elders, trust your horse, and always keep moving when it's time. Discipline wasn't harsh, but it was constant. A child who disobeyed wasn't beaten in anger, but corrected firmly, sometimes with a slap, sometimes with a task doubled. You learn not by being shamed, but by being expected to do better. And those expectations came early. There was no room for weakness, not because people were cruel, but because the environment was unforgiving. A forgotten rope could mean a lost animal. A missed shot could mean no dinner. Everyone had to carry their share. Winter made things harder. Children, bundled in furs so thick they could barely move, trudged through snow to feed animals or gather dung for fuel. Frost-bitten fingers were common. So were cracked lip, wing-burned cheeks, and nights spent shivering beneath shared blankets. But complaints didn't go far. If anything, hardship was met with quiet endurance. That was the Mongol way. Not to resist the land, but to match it, to bend with it. And sometimes to let it harden you into something it couldn't break. Despite all this, children were not unloved. Far from it. Parents showed care through attention, through teaching, through small gifts passed without ceremony. A piece of preserved fruit, a new strap for a bow, a warm drink after a long ride. There were few words for affection, but many acts that proved it. A mother might rise before the sun just to heave a stone and place it in her child's blanket. A father might tie a bell to his child's saddle so he could hear if the pony wandered. Love wasn't loud. It was quiet, practical, steady. And so a Mongol child grew not into softness, but into strength. Not into independence as rebellion, but as necessity. You learn to be ready, to ride, to listen, to wait, and when the time came, to lead without hesitation. Childhood ended early, but what followed wasn't adulthood in the modern sense. It was simply contribution, being part of the group, pulling your weight. This life didn't offer many comforts, but it did offer clarity. A child knew who they were, knew where their value lay, knew that while they were small, they were not powerless. That in a world where everything moved, they had the skill and the grit to keep up. As a Mongol child grew older, their world expanded. What had once been a small cluster of tents and family members became part of something far larger. They learned to recognize faces beyond their kin, to understand that the Horde was not just a group of people, but a body that moved and lived together. When the line of riders stretched out in the morning mist, each child knew they belonged to something bigger than themselves, yet still fragile in its own way. Around the age of 12, a child's responsibilities deepened. Herding turned into solo drives across miles of steppe. Hunting became real, with sharp arrows and the expectation to bring something back. A missed shot no longer meant more practice. It meant someone might go hungry. And at this stage, boys in particular were watched closely by older warriors. Their posture, their attitude, their reactions in tense situations, all were judged quietly. The difference between a child and a soldier was not age, but readiness. For girls, the expectations also sharpened. By their early teens, they were often skilled riders and expert milkers, responsible for entire sections of the herd. Some were trained to manage tents, to understand how to pack, store, and distribute food, or to tend to the younger children. But many could also shoot, ride long distances, and defend the camp if needed. There were no rigid lines. If someone could do a task, they did it. Gender mattered less than capability, and effort was always visible. Children were also expected to learn their ancestry. Names of grandfathers, stories of migration, victories, and defeats. These were recited aloud, repeated until memorized. Identity was carried not in papers or carvings, but in memory. A child who could repeat their lineage back several generations with clarity was praised. Not because it was impressive, but because it was necessary. In a world without borders or passports, stories were your roots. Sometimes a child was taken under the wing of a relative who wasn't a parent. An uncle, A grandmother or an older cousin might become a second guide, passing down knowledge in a quiet, indirect way. Lessons were often given as observations, not instructions. See how that mare walks with a limp. Or do you hear how the wind changes near the ridge? These small moments were full of meaning, but only if you paid attention. And attention was everything. A child who paid attention stayed alive. They noticed when a horse was about to spook. They heard the distant snap of a foot on dry twigs. They read the clouds not for beauty, but for warning. The sky was not a decoration, it was a teacher. The land did not explain itself. You had to listen, watch, and remember. Language was learned through use, not schooling. Mongol children spoke in the rhythms of their parents, picking up slang, old proverbs, and practical terms quickly. They learned how to speak across distances, to shout against wind without losing clarity. Many picked up bits of other languages too, especially those in caravans or military families. A child might know how to greet someone in Persian, curse in Chinese, or count in Russian long before ever seeing a city. Spiritual understanding came early, though it wasn't always called religion. The Mongols believed in spirits of the sky, the land, and their ancestors. Children were taught to show respect to the fire, to never point a knife toward the sky, and to speak the names of the dead softly. They didn't sit in temples or chant verses, but they lived with reverence. A child might offer a piece of the bread to the wind, or whisper thanks after a successful hunt. These small acts connected them to something larger, though it was rarely explained aloud. And with age came the first real exposure to death. Animals died frequently, sometimes from wolves, sometimes from illness, sometimes from need. Children helped skin carcasses, boil bones, clean hides. It was not seen as gruesome, but necessary. When people died, especially elders, there was no great spectacle. Bodies were prepared quietly. Children were told not to cry too loudly, not to disturb the spirit's journey. Grief was shown in stillness and work and carrying on. Boys around the age of 14 or 15 might be brought into training camps for warriors. These were not permanent camps, just more intense versions of life they already knew. Long rides, target practice, sparring. They learned formation, signal calls, and survival techniques far from home. Injuries were common. So were moments of exhaustion. But they returned different, harder, straighter backed, speaking less. Those who did well might be placed in a warband. Those who struggled went back to herding, with the understanding that even that was an honorable path. Some girls were chosen for diplomatic missions, especially those with clever tongues or sharp memories. They learned how to speak formally, how to represent their clan in front of leaders or envoys. Others married young, sometimes by choice, sometimes through arrangements. A girl might marry into a neighboring family, strengthening alliances. But even in marriage, her work rarely changed. The horse, the herd, the tent, these stayed with her. By the time a Mongol child reached their late teens, they were no longer seen as young. They were full participants in the group. Some had already seen battle. Some had given birth. Some had buried a sibling or ridden for days across open land with only a bow and a canteen. Their voices had deepened. Their hands were calloused. Their faces were marked by sun and wind. But inside there was still a trace of the child they had been, a flicker of the small figure racing across the hills, chasing goats, falling off ponies, laughing beneath the endless sky. The transition from child to adult was not marked with a ceremony. No candles, no speeches. It was something others saw in you, something you didn't always recognize in yourself. One day someone handed you a heavier bow, or asked you to lead the line, or stopped checking your work because they knew you already knew. And in that moment, you step forward, not with fanfare, but with quiet certainty. Growing up on horseback meant growing up with motion. It meant learning to be ready for cold mornings, sudden changes, and the long silence of the steppe. It wasn't easy, but it shaped a kind of resilience that would carry the Mongols across continents. It began with a child sitting on a pony, holding on tight, eyes wide in the wind. Let that image linger now. A young rider, hair tangled, cheeks red from cold, galloping alone across a golden field. No roads, no fences, just the sound of hooves, the rhythm of breath, and the freedom that came with knowing exactly what to do. Chapter 4. A day of raiding. Life in the warband. You wake before dawn. Not in a felt tent this time, but beneath a coarse blanket stretched over saddle packs. There's no fire, no chatter. Only the quiet shuffle of horses and the sound of your own breath fogging in the cold. You roll up the blanket without standing, using one hand to reach for your boots. They're stiff with frost, but you don't complain. No one does. This is a raiding unit, and today is not a day for comfort. A few feet away, someone is already saddling their horse. The creak of leather, the soft jingle of a bit being attached. These sounds are familiar, calming even. You've heard them every morning for weeks, maybe months. You've lost track of time. There's no calendar here, no sunrise celebrations. Just the rhythm of waking, riding, and waiting for the next command. Breakfast is simple. A strip of dried meat, already chewed on both ends. You pull it from your coat and bite down, chewing slowly. The cold has hardened it like stone. It doesn't taste like much, but it gives your jaw something to do while the others prepare. Nearby, someone shares a gulp of arag from a skin pouch. You pass it on without speaking. The sour bite warms your throat and then it's gone. The captain of the unit doesn't bark orders. He nods once and everyone starts moving. Horses are mounted. Quivers checked. Bows unwrapped from their protective cloths. No one shouts. No one asks questions. You've been riding together long enough to know what's expected. Today, you're raiding a caravan trail said to be lightly guarded. Not a city, not a fortress. Just a long thread of merchants and mules stretched across the land. You move in columns of 3, spaced apart so dust doesn't cloud your vision. The steppe opens in front of you like it always does, wide and silent, with only the wind brushing over dry grass. The horses snort, their breath steaming in the morning light. Somewhere far off, a falcon cries, but the sound fades fast. After a few hours, you see the signal. A scout raises his hand without turning around. You slow your pace. The unit halts at the edge of a small ridge. Below it, in a shallow dip, you can just make out the shapes of carts. Maybe 8 or 10, 24 animals. A handful of guards. The captain studies them from a distance. No one moves until he does. Finally, he nudges his horse forward and begins a slow arc to the right. You follow in formation. You're not charging. Not yet. That's not the Mongol way. You surround first. You wait. You unsettle them. Then you strike. The approach is slow, calculated. You circle wide, staying just far enough to avoid detection. From your position, you can see the caravan more clearly now. They're merchants, probably from a nearby city. You see bolts of cloth, jars of grain, maybe some silver cups. 2 guards lean against the cart, spears resting beside them. They're not ready. They're not expecting you. The signal comes quickly. A high whistle, barely audible in the wind. In an instant, you press your knees into your horse's flanks. The animal lurches forward. Behind you, the others do the same. Bows are lifted, arrows knocked. You ride fast, but not in a straight line. You zigzag, changing angles to confuse any counterattack. The first arrow flies before the merchants even stand. It hits the side of a cart. The second hits one of the guards in the shoulder. He stumbles, not even shouting. There's no time for fear, only movement. You ride past the carts, loosing another arrow at the nearest man. He drops something as he dives behind a wheel. Your unit doesn't stop. You don't dismount. You circle again, creating chaos. Horses shriek, mules buck against their ropes. A child screams from inside one of the carts. You hear it but ride past. You're not here to rescue or protect. You're here to strip, collect, and vanish. Once the guards are down, the others surrender quickly, hands lifted, heads bowed. They've seen enough to know resistance is useless. One of the older warriors calls out in a sharp voice, telling them to stay where they are. They obey. No one moves. You dismount only when the captain does. By now, the others are already pulling open chests and packs. Cloth, coins, dried dates, tools, and trinkets spill onto the ground. You don't take everything. Only what can be carried. A few food sacks, some silver, 2 good knives, and a length of silk. The rest is left behind. Speed matters more than greed. There's no celebration, no cheer. Just quick movements, fast hands, and the sense that you'll be riding again within minutes. The merchants are left shaken but alive. That was the rule this time. No killings, unless necessary. The Khan wanted fear, not bodies. A message sent without making a massacre. Before leaving, the captain burns one of the carts, not to destroy but to mark, assigned to others, that they were touched by the Horde, that they were lucky to live. The smoke rises behind you as you mount again and turn your horse back toward the hills. You ride fast at first, just in case someone had been watching. Then slower, settling into a steady pace. No one speaks. There's nothing to say. You've done this before, and you'll do it again. Raiding is not an event. It's part of the rhythm. Like packing a tent or herding goats, a task completed, a box checked. The sky is clouding now. You pull your coat tighter, tasting dust on your lips. The wind has shifted. It carries the smell of burned wood and stirred earth. Your horse snorts, sensing your mood, matching your pace. The land around you is quiet again, and for now you're just another rider vanishing into the wide, empty steppe. The dust still clings to your face long after the raid is over. You feel it in the corners of your mouth, along the edges of your eyes, inside your nostrils. The smell of burnt wood stays with you too, mixed with sweat and the faint metallic scent of the coins now hidden in your saddlebag. You don't speak, no one does. The warband rides in a loose cluster, close enough to see each other, far enough to stay alert. Behind you, the trail of smoke disappears slowly into the horizon. The silence after a raid is always heavier than the silence before. You feel the weight of it in your shoulders and your fingers that still twitch now and then, remembering the pull of the bowstring. Your mind replays what happened, not as a story, but as small fragments. The way the merchant's eyes widened, the child's scream, the arrow that struck a cart and made the whole thing shudder like it was alive. None of it feels personal. That's the strange part. It's not that you don't care. It's that you've learned not to carry it. If you thought too long about who you frightened, what was lost, or what a single coin might have meant to someone else, it would only slow you down. And here, on the steppe, slowing down can be dangerous. You stop by a stream around dusk. No fires are lit. It's too risky. You drink cold water from cupped hands. You wash your face. The dust doesn't come off completely, but the gesture matters. It gives the day an endpoint. A mental line drawn in the dirt between the doing and the remembering. The captain walks among you without saying much. He checks each horse, eyes the packs, notes the weariness in your posture. He's not judging, just observing. A warband lives and dies by the smallest cracks. An exhausted mount, a loose stirrup, a careless rider. These are not warriors in shining armor. They are practical men with dirt under their nails and knees that ache when they dismount. You eat quietly. A lump of boiled grain, a few bites of fat scraped from the side of the leather pouch. No one shares stories, no one retells what happened. There's no need. Everyone was there. Everyone saw. Some might feel proud, others uneasy. But the group absorbs those feelings, holds them without showing them. That's part of the code. You do your part, keep moving, and never let emotion get in the way of discipline. One of the younger riders is still shaking slightly, his hands wrapped tight around his bow. It was his first raid. He didn't shoot anyone. He didn't need to. But he saw the face of a man as an arrow took him in the side. He saw how fast life leaves the body. That's always the first shock, that the end can be so quiet. No screams, no final words, just a man standing one moment and then folding like wet cloth. An older warrior notices but says nothing. Instead, he passes the younger one a thicker piece of meat. It's a quiet gesture. Eat more. Keep your strength. Let the land take the memory. And over time it will. The step has a way of sanding down sharp edges, not by healing, but by wearing away. When night falls, the stars appear in clusters, unbothered by the day's events. The horses sleep standing, ears twitching now and then. Some men sleep beside their saddles, others wrapped in blankets beneath a tree or against a slope. You lie down on one side, pulling your coat tight around your chest. The ground is cold, but familiar. It supports your spine like an old friend. You stare up at the sky and see nothing but space. The kind of space that makes you feel both small and necessary at once. No one counts how many raids they've done. You remember some, forget others. The ones that went wrong stay longer. An ambush that cost a life. A storm that turned a fast retreat into a slog through mud and ice. But most days blur together. Ride. Strike. Ride again. The cycle continues not because of cruelty, but because that's how the horde survives. Resources don't come from the ground. They're taken from movement, from speed, from knowing when to strike and when to vanish. In the early hours before dawn, the captain wakes you. You sit up immediately, body sore but alert. The others do the same. You pack your things. No one asks where you're going. You ride west this time, toward another trail, another chance. The line forms like it always does. A thin ribbon of motion moving with purpose through the grass. There's no discussion of right or wrong. The land doesn't ask questions like that. It only asks if you're ready, if you're fast enough, if you know how to disappear when the time comes. This isn't chaos. It's strategy. It's habit. It's a way of life learned over generations, passed down not through words, but through shared motion and silence. You think, for a brief moment, about the merchant caravan, whether they made it to their next stop, whether they'll speak of the attack or carry it like a bruise, unspoken but always sore. You wonder if they'll travel again, and if they do, whether they'll hire more guards, choose a new route, or pray harder to gods who live far away. But the thought fades quickly. The sun is rising again, and the wind is picking up. You adjust your grip on the reins, tighten your cloak, and let the rhythm of hoofbeats carry you forward. Another raid will come. Another moment to act without hesitation. That's what it means to ride in a Mongol warband. You don't linger. You don't look back. You become part of the dust and the wind and the long flat road that has no end. Let yourself drift now, held in that rhythm. The steady breath of your horse, the creak of saddle leather, the endless grass stretching ahead. You are moving again, as always, into the unknown, shaped not by glory, but by quiet obedience, and the unspoken bond of those who ride with you. Chapter 5. The Siege of Baghdad, 1258. The air around Baghdad felt heavy in the days before the siege began. not with noise or confusion, but with stillness. People walked quickly through the streets, speaking in lowered voices. Merchants closed their stalls earlier than usual. Priests tightened their routines. Soldiers moved through the city gates with their armor rattling softly, not in a show of force, but in quiet recognition of what was coming. To the north, beyond the Tigris, dust clouds had been seen, not from windstorms, but from hooves. Thousands of hooves. The Mongols were coming. Word had spread for weeks. Some thought they would stop. Others prayed for negotiation. But those who had watched the signs more closely, those who remembered what had happened in Nishapur, Herat, or Samarkand knew better. The Mongols didn't turn back. Hulagu Khan had been sent west by the Great Khan himself. His task wasn't to conquer a single city. It was to bring all of the Islamic world under Mongol control. Baghdad, once the capital of a vast caliphate, stood in the center of that world. A city of scholars and poets, of gardens and domes, of ancient libraries and bustling markets. But the Mongols didn't care about titles or reputations. They cared about obedience, and when Caliph al-Mustasin refused to submit, the wheels of destruction began to turn. The approach to Baghdad was slow and methodical. The Mongols didn't rush. They sent scouts first, mapping the rivers, counting the towers, measuring distances. Engineers followed, building pontoons to cross water and siege engines from nearby forests. They worked quietly, no singing, no drums. Just the sound of saws and hammers, and the occasional snap of rope as tension was tested. Inside the city, the people waited. Some prepared, others denied. A few still hoped that Baghdad's name alone would protect it. After all, this was the seat of the Abbasid Caliphate, the heart of learning in the Islamic world. Could the Mongols really be so bold as to strike it? But history has never cared much for titles, and the Mongols cared even less. By late January, the siege began. The Mongols encircled the city, cutting off roads and water channels. They divided their forces with purpose, one camp to the east, one to the west. Bridges laid across the Tigris so they could move easily from one side to the other. The circle was drawn, and once it closed, nothing was allowed out. There was no fanfare, no grand declaration, just the thud of the first stones as they were hurled from trebuchets. The sky above Baghdad changed that day. Arrows fell like rain. Rocks the size of cattle smashed into towers and walls. Fire pots lit rooftops and markets. The wind carried smoke. And still, the Mongols said nothing. The people inside the city could only watch. Some tried to resist. Archers lined the walls, aiming at shadows in the distance. They fired bravely. But the return fire was faster, heavier, more precise. The Mongols didn't waste arrows. They didn't shoot blindly. Every release was calculated. And as the days passed, the defenders began to thin. From a rooftop near the southern wall, you might have seen the chaos unfold in layers. The outer neighborhoods catching fire. The central mosques trying to shelter crowds. Horses charging into narrow streets. Siege engines rolling forward slowly, their wheels grinding over broken stone and fallen bodies. And everywhere, the sense that this was not a battle, it was an ending. The caliph remained in his palace, surrounded by advisors and walls too thick to see through. He was not a soldier. His power had come through tradition, not warfare. Some say he still believed the city would hold. Others claim he wept. But whether proud or paralyzed, his actions made little difference. The fate of Baghdad had already passed beyond his hands. By the seventh day, the outer defenses were nearly gone. The Mongols moved steadily, not hurried but relentless. When a section of wall cracked, they did not cheer. They just advanced. Fire spread behind them. Men and animals fled in opposite directions. The city that had once pulsed with life now pulsed with smoke and confusion. Among the Mongols, there was no visible joy, no celebration. This was duty. Baghdad was a target, and targets were to be erased. That was how Hulagu had been trained. How Subotai had taught generations before. Leave no threat behind. Leave no question about who holds power. Still, not everything was destruction. The Mongols were strategic. They spared buildings they found useful. Granaries were taken intact. Wells were protected. Skilled workers were captured, not killed. In some cases, scribes and engineers were given special orders to report to Mongol generals. Even in war, information was valuable. A good map could save weeks of scouting. A smart advisor could prevent future resistance. But for most of the city, there was no such purpose. The libraries burned. The markets collapsed. Families huddled together beneath floorboards or inside mosques. And the sky, once blue and vast, turned dark with ash. As the days passed, the Mongol camp outside the city grew more organized. Tents were erected in neat rows. Horses were kept on rotation, some rested, some ready. Food was prepared in large pots, meat boiled with onions and root vegetables. The soldiers ate without urgency. They cleaned their bows, checked their gear. The siege, for them, was not chaos. It was structure, a daily rhythm of fire and rest. At night, the city glowed, not from lanterns or starlight, but from fires that crackled across rooftops. Some burned homes for warmth, others out of fear. A message, maybe, or a final protest against what they knew was coming. For now, Baghdad still stood, but its breath was short, its walls no longer solid. And outside, the horde waited with the patience of stone. Inside Baghdad, the silence changed. It was no longer the heavy quiet of anticipation, but the numb, vacant kind that settles after something irreversible. People spoke less. Those who still had homes stayed inside them. Those without homes gathered in mosques or along the riverbanks, hoping that if they were still, they might be overlooked. The smoke no longer rose in tight plumes, but in slow drifts, curling over shattered rooftops and crumbling walls. The final blow came not with a charge, but with a surrender. On February 10th, the city's defense collapsed. There was no grand ceremony, no banner waved. Just doors opened, heads bowed, and a procession of trembling hands raised in submission. Caliph Mustasim, the symbolic heart of the Abbasid dynasty, was brought before Hulagu Khan. The meeting was not long. The caliph was dressed in silk, his bearing still proud, but his position meant little now. Hulagu did not shout. He did not threaten. He simply gave an order, and the matter was settled. They did not behead the caliph. Mongol custom respected the symbolism of blood, and to spill royal blood onto the earth was seen as a curse. So the caliph was rolled tightly into a carpet, and horses were made to ride across it until movement stopped. This, too, was quiet. No crowds were present. No speech marked the moment. Only the slow creak of leather and the heavy thud of hooves on fabric. With the caliph dead, the city lost its center. Baghdad had always been more than walls and towers. It had been a symbol. A place where knowledge was preserved, where languages met, where scholars from all over the world had once gathered. Now it was simply territory. And the Mongols, ever methodical, began to sort through what remained. The looting that followed was not reckless. It was organized. Mongol officers entered libraries and took what seemed useful. Astronomical charts, engineering drawings, architectural plans, these were set aside. The rest was left to burn. Some buildings collapsed under their own weight. Others were set alight deliberately. The Great House of Wisdom, a place where generations of scholars had once copied and translated texts from Greek, Persian, Sanskrit, and Arabic, was reduced to ashes. Its shelves were too full, its meaning too symbolic. The Mongols saw danger in what it represented, a center of thought, unaligned with their own order. Manuscripts were thrown into the Tigris. The ink bled into the water, and by some accounts, the river ran dark for days. It is said that for a short time you could reach into the Tigris and pull out a book, soaked but intact, though those who did so often found the pages stuck together, unreadable, ruined by the very element that carried them. These were stories that would never be rewritten. Across the city, the Mongol army followed orders. Soldiers took livestock, tools, anything portable. They rarely spoke. The conquest had been decisive. There was no resistance left to provoke them. Civilians were either killed, conscripted, or left behind to bury the rest. Families huddled in corners of broken homes. Some offered valuables in silence, hoping to be spared. Others did not have the chance. But the destruction was not absolute. Hulagu was not interested in razing the city to dust. He kept bridges intact. He spared certain artisans. He identified engineers and scribes and sent them east. These people were valuable not as citizens but as functionaries. They could build, calculate, record. The Mongols didn't destroy for pleasure. They destroyed to eliminate threats and repurpose what remained. And yet, the death toll was staggering. Some chroniclers claimed as many as 200,000 people perished. Others said the number was higher. We may never know. Bodies were piled in the streets, too many to bury properly. Wells were clogged with debris and ash. Birds stopped circling the towers, finding nothing left to scavenge. Dogs, once pets, became scavengers. Cats disappeared. The city had gone still. What followed was an eerie kind of reordering. Mongol tents were pitched within the city walls. Not beside the river or in open camps, but inside courtyards and empty markets. They set up butcher stations, grain storage, weapon maintenance. Life resumed, but in a different shape. It was no longer a city of culture, but a forward base for continued conquest. What had been a jewel was now a waypoint. To the Mongol warriors, there was no victory song, no feast to mark the occasion. They sat by fires, cleaned their horses, sharpened their weapons. Some played instruments softly, string lutes made from wood and horsehair. Others dozed beside their gear. This was not the end of anything for them. It was only the beginning of what came next. Hulagu himself toured the remains of the city. He did not weep for the burned libraries or admire the collapsed domes. He noted which streets could support heavy carts. He asked where the grain stores had been. He sent word back to Karakorum that Baghdad had fallen, and that new roads would be needed to transport the spoils. Back east, scholars would later puzzle over the destruction. Why was Baghdad allowed to fall so completely? Why was there no mercy for its history? But the Mongols did not see history the same way. They respected strength, speed, discipline. Baghdad's greatest achievements, its books, its thinkers, its poetry, had no place in the hard order of the Mongol Empire. To them, a city that refused to submit had forfeited its right to exist as it was. In the weeks that followed, few travelers passed through Baghdad. The roads were quiet. Dust settled into every crack. The river continued to flow, slower now, as if carrying the weight of the past on its surface. And the city, which had once been the heart of a civilization, now beat no more. Let the scene fade now. Picture the last embers flickering in the early morning light. Imagine the water lapping gently at the banks, stained with memory. And feel the stillness that follows, not the peace of resolution, but the hush that settles when the noise is gone and only the shape of things remains. Picture a narrow dirt path winding through open steppe. No stone markers, no carved signs, just faint tracks in the grass, left behind by hooves and wheels. The land seems empty, but if you follow the path long enough, you will come to a wooden post driven into the ground beside a low tent. A Mongol flag sways gently above it. This is a yam station, a checkpoint in one of the most efficient systems the world had ever seen. In the heart of the Mongol Empire, communication was everything. Orders had to move fast. Messages had to reach distant generals without delay. Supply routes had to stay open across vast, unforgiving terrain. To make this possible, the Khans built something extraordinary. A relay system of horses, riders, and rest stops that stretched across thousands of miles. The yam was their lifeline. Each station was placed a fixed distance apart, usually about 25 miles, or the length a strong horse could ride at speed without breaking. These weren't cities or forts. They were simple places. A felt tent or wooden shelter, a fence paddock, a fire pit, a place to boil water. There were always fresh horses waiting, and sometimes spare boughs, maps, or food. Riders would arrive breathless, dismount without a word, and mount the next horse within moments. There was no time to linger. The message mattered more than the messenger. With each leg of the journey, the horse changed, but the mission stayed the same. Whether carrying orders from the Khan or reports from a distant outpost, the rider's task was to move and to keep moving. You can imagine one of them now. A young man in layered felt robes, dust coating his boots, eyes narrowed against the sun. He grips the reins with one hand and the message with the other. Not a scroll sealed in wax, but a simple strip of parchment, folded tightly and secured in a leather pouch. It contains no poetry, no decoration, just facts, coordinates, names, numbers. A report that might shift the course of a campaign or redirect 1,000 soldiers. The rider does not pause to admire the view. The sky above is wide and clean. The land stretches endlessly in every direction. But to him, this is not scenery. It is a road. Every ridge, every creek crossing, every stand of trees is a marker. He knows them like someone else might know street corners or alleyways. He follows them not with thought, but with instinct. His horse does too. Some days, the journey is simple. The weather is mild. The wind at his back. The path dry. Other days bring challenges. A sudden storm rolls in, turning gust to mud. A herd of wild antelope blocks the trail. Or worse, a wolf appears in the distance, watching with cold eyes. The rider doesn't fight these things. He adapts. He steers gently around the obstacle and keeps going. Always forward. At the next station, a family waits. They are caretakers of the post, not soldiers, not riders. Just people chosen for their reliability and skill. They know how to care for horses, how to mend saddles, how to make broth that restores energy without slowing digestion. They have lived here for years, serving the empire not with weapons, but with patience. They do not ask questions. When the rider arrives, they lead him to the next horse. If he needs food, they hand him a piece of flatbread wrapped in cloth. If he needs warmth, they offer tea brewed with salt and milk, but they do not make him stay. The yam depends on movement. Speed matters more than rest. And so, within minutes, the rider is gone again. Just a blur on the horizon. The empire is wide. From Korea in the east to Hungary in the west, the yam stretches like a nervous system across its body. No other empire had anything like it. Other kingdoms sent messages by caravan or by foot. The Mongols sent them by relay, with horses switching every hour, and men trained to ignore pain, hunger, and sleep until the message was delivered. They carried all kinds of news, a report from the battlefront, an order to move 1,000 carts, a request for tribute, a death notice. Sometimes they carried warnings, enemy troops spotted near the border, a disease spreading in a village, a river crossing lost to flood. The empire depended on knowing, and the writers made that possible. To protect them, the Khans issued a special tablet. It was made of wood or silver and bore the imperial seal. With it, a messenger could take whatever he needed: fresh horses, food, shelter. No one could deny him. If they did, they risked punishment. The tablet was power, and it moved with the same quiet authority as the men who held it. But power didn't mean comfort. The riders still faced hardship. There were no inns, no soft beds. They slept curled beside their horses, ate what they were given, wrapped themselves in wool, and rode through blizzards and heat waves alike. Their names were rarely recorded. Their voices were seldom heard. They were shadows moving between points on a map, each one forgotten the moment the message arrived. And yet, without them, the empire would have collapsed. The Mongols conquered with speed, and speed required information. A battle delayed by a day could be lost. A supply shipment misrouted could mean hunger for an entire division. The yam solved that. It tied the farthest corners of the empire together like threads, each one pulled tight, each one held in place by a horse, a message, and a man who did not stop. Sometimes the rider saw nothing for days. No villages, no enemies, just the grass underfoot and the wind on his cheek. He did not complain. He did not ask why. His job was to ride, to carry something small that meant something large. And when he reached the last station, he would hand off the message with no ceremony. Then, quietly, he would sleep. Let that image stay with you now. The rider resting, his task complete, his horse beside him, grazing slowly in the fading light, the road behind them silent. The next message already on its way. The yam was not just a courier network. It was the invisible spine of an empire that had grown too large to be ruled by presence alone. Mongol rulers could not stand on every hilltop or at every crossroads. They could not attend every council or inspect every garrison, but through the yam they could know who had arrived, who had defected, who had failed to pay tribute, who had rebelled, and more importantly, they could act on that knowledge within days instead of months. In some ways, the yam was more impressive than the conquests it supported. The taking of cities, the defeating of armies, the building of power, these things made headlines in history. But the yam made sure that those victories didn't collapse afterward. Without it, there would have been confusion, delays, silence. The empire might have cracked in its middle before it reached its edge. The riders were only one part of it. Each station required people, dozens of workers across hundreds of miles. There were blacksmiths to repair horseshoes, tanners to mend harnesses, cooks to feed travelers, guards to watch for bandits, and families who lived their entire lives alongside the path. They weren't warriors or governors. They were the quiet tenders of the thread. Their work didn't make it into legends, but it kept the lines from fraying. Even those not part of the military used the yam. Diplomats traveled along its paths, carrying messages between kingdoms. Merchants secured temporary passes to move between cities faster. Sometimes, even common travelers, with permission, could follow the yam trail for part of their journey, benefiting from the security and structure it provided. But always the messengers took priority. When they came riding through, everyone else stepped aside. At its height, the yam included more than 1,000 stations, stretching from the Korean peninsula to the gates of Eastern Europe. There were routes across deserts, routes through forests, and routes that climbed mountains where the air grew thin and horses breathed in short bursts. Still, they rode. Still, they arrived. Some historians believe this system helped inspire later empires. The Ottoman postal network, the Persian courier system. Even parts of the European Renaissance trade routes carried echoes of the yam. But at the time, there was nothing quite like it. In a world where messages often died with the messenger, the Mongols had created something that felt almost modern, something designed not for glory, but for function. And they guarded it fiercely. Sabotage of a yam station was a serious offense. Robbing a rider, even one without an escort, could lead to execution. The stations were not castles, but they were respected. Protected by law and often by fear, people along the routes understood that the Mongol Empire tolerated no interruptions in its flow of information. The roads could not sleep. The riders could not wait. But even the most precise system had its human side. Riders developed preferences. A favorite horse had a certain station. A family that always gave hot broth instead of dry biscuits. A short rest at a tree stump worn smooth by generations of messengers. They didn't talk much, but they noticed, they remembered. Even when their job was to forget everything but the road, they carried small comforts like these. There were dangers, of course. Bandits still roamed, especially in newly conquered lands. Riders often went armed, with bows slung across their backs and knives at their belts. Not to wage war, but to buy time. A fleeing messenger could sometimes outrun trouble. Other times, they disappeared. And when that happened, a second message would follow. Not carrying news, but carrying the question, what happened to the first? Not all riders returned. Some froze in mountain passes. Some were caught in flash floods. Some simply vanished into the folds of the land, their horses found days later grazing alone. But the system went on. A new rider would be trained. The message would be copied. The gap would be closed. It was not a romantic life. There were no medals. Only the knowledge that their part, however small, helped hold the empire together. Over time, the yam evolved. More permanent stations were built in some places. Larger shelters with stone walls or wooden beams. In cities, the system fed directly into the administrative offices of governors and tax officials. Messages no longer had to wait for interpretation. They were read, sorted, responded to, and sent back out often on the same day. The speed was remarkable. And that speed shaped policy, movement, even the way Mongols thought about distance. What once seemed far became reachable. What once took weeks now took days. For an empire built on mobility, this was more than a tool. It was an identity. Imagine the rhythm of it now. A rider galloping past a stand of trees, dust curling behind him. Another rider crouched near a fire, wrapping his coat tighter as he waits for the next arrival. A tired mare drinking from a trough. A scribe rolling up a new message, wiping the ink before passing it to the next courier. These scenes repeated over and over, across thousands of miles, all for the sake of words moving faster than feet. And when winter came, and the wind turned sharp, the yam didn't stop. Snow made the tracks harder to see, but the riders adjusted. They learned the land differently, followed the shape of hills, the bend of rivers, the position of stars. Cold stiffened their hands, but the messages still moved. No great stone markers remained from the yam, no grand arches, no towering statues. But in its time, it was as powerful as any wall or army. It was the quiet thing that made loud things possible. The stillness between campaigns, the breath between orders. The whisper that reached across mountains faster than any scream. And now, as the empire once again prepares to move into new lands, toward new threats, the Yan will carry those plans forward. Not with fanfare, not with flags, but with a rider, a horse, and a message folded in leather carried into the wind. Let that picture rest in your mind, the land wide and silent. A single rider in the distance, a campfire ahead. The promise of rest for a moment, then the next leg of the journey. Always forward, always watching the path, always carrying the empire, one gallop at a time. Chapter 7, Punishments in the Mongol Code, Yasa Law, in the open lands of the Mongol Empire. Where there were few cities and no borders drawn in stone, law had to travel in memory. There were no courtrooms, no printed handbooks, but the rules existed, firm and unmistakable. They passed from mouth to mouth, repeated in tents, echoed in camps, whispered over firelight. The Mongols called it yasa. The word itself meant order or decree, but it wasn't a single document. It was a living system, part law code, part moral compass, part military doctrine. It shaped behavior, directed punishment, and held the horde together as it swept across deserts, rivers, and mountains. Genghis Khan was said to have created the yasa himself, or at least the core of it. Over time, others added to it, clarified it, and used it to manage an empire that stretched farther than any before it. The yasa was not built for fairness in the modern sense. It was built for unity, for speed, for obedience. It didn't waste words. It didn't leave room for debate. It laid out expectations with startling clarity, and the consequences that came when those expectations were broken. And though it was harsh, it brought a strange kind of calm. Everyone knew where they stood. One of the most important rules was about theft. In a world where everything a person owned might be tied to the back of a single horse, stealing was more than an insult. It was a threat to survival. If you were caught stealing a horse, the punishment was death. No long trial, no argument. The horse meant food, warmth, movement, even safety. Taking it meant endangering a life. The same applied to livestock, weapons, or essential supplies. There were no second chances. False witness was treated just as severely. Lying in a dispute could bring punishment equal to the crime you falsely accused someone of. If you claimed another man had stolen from you, and it turned out you had lied, you might lose what he would have lost. Vyasa discouraged dishonesty, not with sermons, but with consequence. Other parts of the law governed family. Men and women were expected to marry within certain limits. Children born out of proper unions could not inherit. Disrespect to one's parents was punishable. So was abandoning one's family during hardship. The structure of the household mattered deeply. A person's role within it was not just personal, it was political, tribal, economic. The Asa protected those roles with strict guidelines. Then there were the military laws. A soldier who disobeyed orders in battle could be executed, not just for cowardice, but for breaking the rhythm of the group. The Mongol army functioned like a body, every part moving in sync. If one rider charged too early or held back too long, it could throw off an entire maneuver. So, discipline was enforced with silence and precision. No yelling, no debates, just a signal, a nod, and if needed, a punishment carried out quickly and publicly. Sharing was also part of the code. On campaigns, any loot taken in battle had to be turned over to commanders first. It would then be distributed fairly. Keeping something back, whether it was a coin, a necklace, or a bolt of cloth, was considered a serious offense. The law wasn't built to reward greed. It was built to keep the machine running smoothly, and greed introduced friction. Even food was regulated. During hunts, for example, if a soldier took meat before it had been fairly divided, he could face discipline. The same applied during official feasts. One man eating more than his share wasn't just selfish, it was disruptive. The horde ran on shared scarcity, not abundance. So the laws ensured no one took more than their part, no matter their rank. And yet, the yasa wasn't all punishment. It also protected. Women were guaranteed certain rights under Mongol law. They could own property. They could speak in councils. In some cases, they even led households while husbands were away at war. Abuse against a woman could lead to exile or death. The law recognized that in a mobile, fragile society, women weren't to be kept apart. They were essential, and that role was protected not just by culture, but by rule. Religious tolerance, too, was written into the spirit of the Yasa. Genghis Khan had observed early on that his empire was too diverse to be bound by one belief. Christians, Buddhists, Muslims, shamans, all were given space, as long as they paid their taxes and respected the order of the state. Religious officials were often exempt from certain duties like taxation or military service as long as they stayed in their lane. The law didn't ask people to change their gods. It asked them to follow the same earthly rules. Even animals were included in the Yasa. There were instructions on how to care for them. Mistreating a horse could lead to punishment. Overworking an ox was frowned upon. The Mongols had grown up alongside their animals, depended on them, shared space with them. They weren't sacred, but they were necessary. And necessity earned protection. The law also reached into trade. Merchants traveling through Mongol lands were expected to register their goods, follow set routes, and respect the people along the way. In exchange, the Mongols offered security. Caravans under their flag were rarely attacked. Roads were kept clear. Bandits were punished harshly. The Yasa made commerce possible across vast distances by removing uncertainty. Traders who obeyed the law thrived. Those who didn't disappeared. There was no appeal process, no high court in a marble building. Judgments were made by commanders, clan leaders, or trusted officials appointed by the Khan. Sometimes punishment came in the form of exile. Other times it came by blade, but it always came swiftly. Delays were rare. The law wasn't just a set of instructions. It was a habit, a structure people could build their lives around. Let that quiet structure settle in your mind now. The calm of knowing the rules, the silence that follows order. A world where people speak softly, ride carefully, and sleep near their horses, knowing that if something goes wrong, the law will not hesitate. It might not be fair by modern standards, but it is clear. And in the cold wind of the steppe, clarity can feel like safety. When people talk about the Mongol Empire, they often focus on its conquests, on the battles, the horses, the banners waving in the wind. But beneath all of that was something quieter. It was the understanding carried from camp to camp that the law was always watching, even when no one else was. The Yasa didn't rely on fences or prisons. It relied on presence, on the idea that rules were known and that the consequences were never far behind. This shaped daily life in ways that went beyond punishment. A man walking past a pile of unattended goods would pause before touching anything. Not because someone was watching, but because the rule lived in his bones. A woman preparing a feast would carefully portion each serving, knowing that even hospitality had its balance. A child leading livestock to pasture would not raise a hand in frustration, because even animals, under the law, were to be treated with restraint. The fear wasn't theatrical. It was subtle. The kind of fear that comes not from stories, but from repetition. You heard again and again what happened to the man who lied about his herd, or the rider who kept a silver cup instead of turning it in. Not dramatic tales, just quiet lessons that stuck. A name mentioned less frequently. A tent no longer pitched beside yours. An absence that said everything. Justice, when it came, was rarely a public spectacle. In some cases, the accused was taken aside. A decision made. A sentence delivered. Sometimes there were witnesses. Sometimes not. But the story would spread, and that was enough. The Mongol leadership understood the power of silence. You didn't need to see punishment to believe in it. You only needed to know that it always arrived. In larger camps, there were men specifically tasked with enforcing the Yasa. They were not judges in robes or men with gavels. They were riders, chosen for their loyalty and memory, who knew the law by heart and could apply it without hesitation. They were feared but not hated. Their role was respected because everyone understood that order kept the horde alive. Without the law, the Mongols were just scattered riders. With it, they became a force. There were times when the punishment wasn't death or exile, but labor. A man who disobeyed might be ordered to serve the camp, repairing saddles, cleaning gear, mending tents, for months. Not because the job was shameful, but because it placed him in the center of things. Everyone could see him. Everyone remembered why. That visibility became a warning without a word being spoken. The yasa also included strange, almost symbolic rules. For instance, washing clothes in running water was forbidden, not because of sanitation, but because rivers were sacred. Polluting one was an offense against more than nature. It was an insult to the spirits of the land. Similarly, urinating near a fire was considered deeply disrespectful, as fire was a purifier. These weren't about hygiene. They were about relationships between people and the elements, between survival and reverence. The Mongols were not highly literate. Most could not read or write, but they remembered. That was their strength. The law didn't need to be written if everyone carried it inside them. Children learned the rules alongside how to ride. They practiced archery and recited punishments. They were reminded with gentle taps and stern looks long before they ever faced judgment. Vyasa began as law, but it became culture. And culture creates trust. Not always comfort, but trust. A man could leave his belongings outside his tent while he fetched water, knowing that his neighbors would not touch them. A soldier could accept shared rations from another unit without suspicion. A caravan trader could ride into Mongol territory without bribes or guards and expect fair treatment as long as he followed the rules. Of course, the law wasn't perfect. Power still shaped outcomes. A favored commander might receive leniency where a common man would not. Some officers interpreted the rules differently depending on clan politics or circumstance. But overall, the yasa was consistent. Consistent enough that people adjusted their lives to fit inside it. And in an empire that moved as fast as the Mongols did, consistency was as valuable as gold. Sometimes the law reached places it didn't belong. A village newly conquered might be expected to follow Mongol rules before it had even learned them. A religious leader from another tradition might be caught violating a custom he had never heard of. But even then, the Mongols made exceptions. In the early years, at least, they allowed conquered peoples to keep their own laws, as long as they didn't interfere with imperial order. Taxes were non-negotiable. Military service could be required, but day-to-day justice could stay local until it didn't. When rebellion happened, the yasa turned cold. There was no forgiveness for disobedience at scale. Cities that resisted were punished as a whole, leaders executed, populations relocated. The law in those moments became less about guidance and more about example. It told the world what happened when order was challenged, and the message echoed generations. Still, the Mongol world was not built on cruelty. It was built on clarity. Rules were tools. They shaped behavior not through kindness or fear alone, but through repetition, stability, and the quiet comfort of knowing what was expected. In a world without borders, that stability was everything. Even now, long after the empire faded, historians study the yasa with a mix of wonder and unease. It was flexible and harsh, practical and strange, a system that held together the fastest growing empire in history, not by walls or monuments, but by agreements made in felt tents, remembered by heart and honored in silence. Let the quiet weight of that law settle around you now. Imagine a world where every rider knew what was forbidden, where every campfire glowed under the same code, where the wind might carry a message, but never carried uncertainty. This was the law of the steppe. Firm, invisible, unforgettable. Chapter 8. The Secrets of the Genghis Khan Burial Site. There are no towering tombs, no grand mausoleums etched in marble, no gold-covered sarcophagi or statues raised in eternal honor. For a man who ruled more land than anyone before or since, Genghis Khan left behind no marked grave. His final resting place is a mystery, wrapped not in stone, but in silence. And perhaps that was exactly what he intended. The Mongols did not build pyramids or palace vaults. Their connection to the land was quieter, tighter. They didn't believe in raising monuments that separated death from life. The body returned to the earth. The spirit moved on. There was no need for the world to follow where it couldn't go. Genghis Khan, born Temujin, had requested something simple. A burial with no markings, no glory, just a return to the soil. By the time of his death in 1227, he had built an empire that stretched from the Sea of Japan to the shores of the Caspian. He had defeated kingdoms, reorganized armies, rewritten rules, but in the end he asked only to vanish. The story begins somewhere in the remote hills of Mongolia. Some say it was near the Anan River, where he had been born. Others believe it was deep in the Khenti mountain, far from any road, where the air grows thin and the trees stand like sentinels in the mist. Wherever it was, those who knew the exact place never told. Or if they did, they didn't live long afterward. According to legend, the funeral procession was immense. Hundreds of riders escorted the Khan's body across the steppe. The journey took days, maybe weeks, and along the way they erased every trace of their path. Trees were uprooted. Grass was turned. Stones were scattered. If they passed through a village, the villagers were said to have been silenced. If they crossed a river, it was said they dammed it afterward, drowning the trail beneath water. Once they reached the chosen site, the burial was performed quickly. The body was lowered into the ground, some say in a wooden box, others in a felt shroud. Around him they may have placed his weapons, his armor, a horse for the next life, but the details are lost. The site was covered, disguised, and left behind with no marker, no shrine, no prayer stone, just earth, as if nothing had happened at all. Then the riders who performed the burial rode away, and in some versions of the story, they were followed by more riders, not to protect them, but to erase them. One final act of concealment. A wall of silence built not with bricks, but with endings. The effort didn't stop there. Later, it's said that a forest was planted over the burial ground. Trees spaced with precision, grown in even lines, so that no one would notice a disturbance in the terrain. A river was diverted. Wild horses released nearby to trample any remaining sin. The goal wasn't to hide the grave for a few years, it was to hide it forever. And it worked. For centuries no one found it. Explorers searched. Historians speculated. But the land kept it secret. There were clues sometimes. Old texts in foreign languages. Local stories passed down in whispers. A ridge described in an ancient Chinese chronicle. A hunting camp remembered in a fading Mongol poem. But every lead ended in the same way, with questions still unanswered. In the Soviet era, the search gained new urgency. Teams were sent to Mongolia, equipped with tools and maps and state backing. But even they returned empty-handed. The terrain was too vast, the steppe too quiet, the land too loyal to a man who had once ruled it. Modern technology has tried to. Satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, archaeological surveys. Still, the grave has not been found. Some believe it lies beneath an ancient fortress in Khenti province. Others argue that it is on a remote mountain slope, now part of a protected region closed to outsiders. And some think that it may never have existed in any permanent form, that the Khan's body was left in the open. exposed to wind and sky like the bones of an honored warrior. There is poetry in the mystery. Genghis Khan, who altered the fate of continents, who reorganized the world's trade routes, whose decisions ripple into the present day, may now lie beneath a tree, unvisited. Grass may grow above him, foxes may pass by without knowing. And that, in its own way, is a form of power being remembered without being seen. The Mongols never needed stone to remember him. His name lived in stories, in songs sung beside the fire. In the long pause before a leader made a difficult choice. What would Genghis have done? They asked not because they knew, but because the question itself carried weight. His burial was not a monument. It was a message. That life ends, but the world continues. That greatness doesn't need gold to endure. The people of Mongolia still honor him. His name is spoken with respect. His memory wrapped into the wind that moves across the hills. Tourists visit monuments, yes, modern constructions in his name, but they are not graves. They are tributes, and none of them claims to be the place where he rests. Let that quiet image linger now. A low hill somewhere in the distance, a patch of land no different from the others, grass waving in the breeze, a bird landing softly nearby. No sign, no sound. Just the weight of history sleeping under soil, exactly where it wants to be. Some scholars believe the mystery endures not because the grave was lost, but because it was never meant to be found. Genghis Khan understood legacy in a different way. He didn't build his image in temples or carve it into marble. He built it in law, in loyalty, in the ability of a message to reach its destination across impossible distances. He built it in motion, in memory, in fear, and in awe. A grave might have pinned him to one place. He preferred to be everywhere. And so his grave became more powerful through absence. It became a question without an answer. A place where silence speaks louder than discovery. And that in itself became part of Mongol culture. Not knowing was not seen as failure. It was seen as protection. The land still holds him because it chooses to. And those who live on it do not pry too deeply. Over the centuries, Mongolian families passed down fragments. A story about a rider disappearing into a forest. A river that once changed course overnight. A place where horses refused to linger. These details appear in folk songs, in lullabies, in offhand remarks shared under starlight. But none are concrete. They are pieces of a puzzle that no one truly wants completed. There have been moments, though, when the world tried. During the 20th century, rumors of a Japanese expedition circulated, claiming that wartime spies had located the grave using aerial photography, but the images were lost, or misfiled, or quietly buried themselves. In the years that followed, the Soviet Union made similar efforts. Some say they found something in the Kenti region, a mound, a scatter of bones, a strange stillness in the air, but no report was made public. Perhaps they too understood the cost of uncovering what was meant to remain closed. The area believed to contain the grave eventually became sacred ground, not by official decree, but by collective will. Locals avoid it. Pilgrims visit not to dig, but to sit, to listen. They speak softly there. Children are kept close. Horses are walked, not ridden. The atmosphere changes without warning. The wind slows. The temperature drops. It's not frightening. Just different, as if the land is remembering something you can't quite see. And so the question remains, not just where is the grave, but why does it matter that we find it? For some, it's The historian's instinct to close the loop, to turn a story into a place you can visit, to connect the human to the ground they once walked on. But for others, especially those who carry the legacy of the steppe, the not knowing is its own form of respect. To disturb the grave would be to violate an agreement made long ago, when the rider scattered the tracks and let the earth take him back. Modern technology, of course, still probes gently at the question. In recent years, scientists have used drone mapping, radar scanning, and even satellite archaeology to analyze the terrain for unnatural patterns. They found some straight lines in forests where trees should grow wild, anomalies beneath the soil. But every lead remains unconfirmed. The closer they get, the more the answers seem to slip away. And the Mongolian government has taken steps to protect the land. Permits are required. Exploration is limited. Some areas are permanently closed, partly to preserve the environment, partly because the past does not need to be disturbed to be respected. There's something comforting in that idea, that some stories do not need an ending to have weight, that a grave can mean more as a mystery than as a site. In an age where nearly everything can be found, scanned, photographed, and shared, Genghis Khan remains hidden not through tricks or denial, but through deep, deliberate absence. He's everywhere and nowhere, on coins, in books, on statues. But his body remains out of reach, carried perhaps in the bones of the horses who once rode for him, in the songs sung by herders on cold nights, in the hush that falls over a valley with no name. Some travelers claim they felt it. That moment when the land grows heavy beneath your feet, when the grass sways against the direction of the wind, when the birds fall silent all at once. They stop, look around, feel something ancient just beyond their senses, and then walk away without taking a single stone. They never speak of it in detail, only say that it felt like a place that didn't want to be opened. And so the grave of Genghis Khan remains untouched, not because it was forgotten, but because forgetting was the point. Let your thoughts rest there now, in that quiet place. A patch of steppe, still and wide, no road signs, no fences. Just the rhythm of grass, the curve of hills, and beneath it all, the resting place of a man who once moved the world. Chapter 9. Battle formations and psychological warfare. From a distance, the Mongol army did not look like much. Just a long, low cloud of dust, a blur of motion across the steppe. The glint of helmets in the sun, a cluster of riders spread across the horizon, no flags waving in formation, no trumpet fanfare, no wall of shields clashing forward. Just movement steady, quiet, and fast. But if you could look closer, you would see that the blur was not chaos. It was order sharp, precise, and terrifyingly efficient. The Mongols did not rely on brute force. They built their victories from calculation, practice, and control. And beneath the hooves, beneath the dust, was a plan so refined it hardly looked like a plan at all. Each division was arranged in multiples of 10. 10 men made a unit. 10 units made a company. 10 companies made a regiment. This simplicity made the army flexible. It allowed orders to move fast, even across wide terrain. A single signal could shift the entire formation. A whistle, a banner, a hand raised in the air. The message traveled down the line, not shouted, but mirrored, and the riders moved as one. They trained constantly, not in grand stadiums, but on the land itself. They practiced shooting from horseback at full speed, learning to release arrows between heartbeats, aiming not just with their eyes, but with their breath. They trained to turn mid-gallop, to break off in opposite directions, to vanish and reappear on a different flank. Their horses were partners in this, chosen not just for strength, but for intelligence. Some responded to subtle shifts of the knee or shoulder. Others followed voice commands alone. And then there was the silence. Mongol troops didn't shout in battle unless it was part of a tactic. They didn't bang drums unless it served a purpose. Much of their communication was visual. Flags raised, arrows fired in specific patterns, formations shifting in silence until the enemy realized too late that they were being surrounded. The stillness before the strike was often more frightening than the strike itself. Their most famous tactic was the feigned retreat. It looked like panic. A group of Mongols would rush forward, fire a few arrows, then turn and flee. The enemy, believing they had gained the upper hand, would give chase. They would follow over ridges, through narrow paths, across dry riverbeds. But the Mongols were not running. They were pulling, drawing their opponents into a trap set far ahead. And once the enemy was stretched thin, once the ground shifted beneath their feet, the Mongols would wheel around and strike from all sides. It was not the strength of their weapons that won battles. It was the strength of their timing. Arrows were fired in volleys, not randomly, but with spacing so that each second brought a new wave. Shields were tested, then bypassed. Weak points were marked in the mind and then targeted again and again. Some units carried fire pots, lighting the ground as they moved. Others used whistles to confuse the enemy, making it sound like riders were coming from directions they weren't. The psychological side of warfare mattered just as much. Long before a battle began, the Mongols sent messages, sometimes respectful in tone but heavy with threat. Submit and live. Resist and be erased. Other times they sent nothing at all. Just scouts who stood on ridgelines, watching in silence, letting their presence speak for them. Villages would see dust on the edge of the world and know what it meant. Some surrendered without a fight. Others prepared defenses that would never be tested. Fear was a tool, not just the fear of death, but the fear of uncertainty. The Mongols moved faster than news. By the time a messenger arrived in one city to warn danger, another might already be under siege. Rumors spread, often exaggerated, and the Mongols let them. They didn't correct falsehoods. If people believed that the Mongols could call lightning from the sky or that they fought without sleep, so much the better. Fear made cities open their gates. Even their appearance added to the effect. Mongol riders wore coats layered with leather and silk, designed to stop arrows and shed water. Their armor wasn't flashy, but it was effective. And their helmets, rounded, fur-lined, low over the brow, made their faces hard to read. Some wore masks in battle, stylized and emotionless. To the enemy, they looked more like a force of nature than men. The horses played a role too. Mongol ponies were small but tireless, trained for endurance, not beauty. A single rider often had several, switching between them to preserve strength. An army on the move could rotate mounts and keep going for days without pause. This gave them a kind of weightlessness. They appeared where they weren't expected, moved faster than logic allowed, surrounded before the enemy had time to form a plan. And when a city did fall, the Mongols made sure the world heard about it. Survivors were sent back with stories, not because the Mongols enjoyed cruelty, but because they understood impact. A siege wasn't just about one location. It was about the next 10, and the 10 after that. Each conquest sent a ripple, and each ripple prepared the ground for the next. Let your mind settle with that image now. The open steppe. A line of riders in the distance, moving without sound. No banners flapping. No dust kicked in panic. Just a calm, steady approach. Horses in sync. Eyes forward. And somewhere in their pattern, a plan already unfolding. That steady approach, the one that began as a thin line on the horizon, rarely came without a purpose. Mongol commanders were rarely impulsive. Each movement was part of a sequence, and every engagement, no matter how minor, served a wider plan. The man at the center of this machine was not always at the front. In fact, Genghis Khan and his successors often watched battles unfold from a distance. Seated on a rise or low hill, observing quietly as the storm they had designed began to move. They didn't bark orders mid-battle. Most instructions were given before the fight began. Positions were rehearsed. Contingencies discussed. Scouts rode ahead not only to report on terrain, but to plant doubt. If a village saw riders on one side today and on another tomorrow, they began to wonder just how many there were. It was a performance of presence. Make them believe they are surrounded, and they will act like it long before the first arrow is loosed. One of the greatest examples of this planning came during the Battle of Crackle River in 1223. The Mongols, facing a coalition of Russian princes, seemed to be outnumbered. They retreated, or seemed to. For 9 days they fell back, always just out of reach, baiting their enemies into pursuit. The Russians followed, strung out across the landscape, unaware that they were being led. When the moment was right, the Mongols turned. They struck with speed and unity, collapsing the enemy's lines in moments. What looked like a retreat had been an invitation. This was not an isolated case. Again and again, Mongol generals played with distance and timing like musicians tuning an instrument. They opened gaps to invite attacks, only to close them with force. They left their flanks exposed, then filled them at the last second. They shifted their central lines mid-fight, splitting armies in half before the enemy realized it had happened. It wasn't magic. It was repetition, discipline, and total trust in the man riding beside you. Part of what made this possible was the shared culture of the Mongol soldiers. They spoke the same commands, practiced the same drills, and lived side by side even in peace. This wasn't an army cobbled together from strangers. It was a brotherhood. They ate together, rode together, trained on the same plains, and believed in the same chain of command. That unity allowed for battlefield decisions that felt like instinct. Each Mongol unit carried with it not just weapons, but information. They studied the enemy, learned about their formations, weaknesses, habits. If a rival general was known to favor frontal charges, the Mongols would build a formation designed to collapse inward. If the enemy liked to hold a hill, they would send archers to harass from below until the position became untenable. The goal was always the same: make the opponent react, never let them settle. Even when the Mongols were at rest, their psychology remained intact. At night, they sometimes lit multiple campfires to give the illusion of larger numbers. They moved in loops to obscure their tracks. They rotated their banners between units so that observers could not count them accurately. The battlefield was not just the land between armies. It was the mind of the man watching from the wall. Surrender, in this context, was a form of defense, and the Mongols offered it often. Cities that complied or absorbed taxed and left relatively unharmed. Those that resisted were punished swiftly and completely. This binary created a pattern that others could read. You knew what would happen if you fought. You also knew what might happen if you didn't. That choice was never easy, but it was always clear. And yet, the Mongols didn't rely only on fear. They respected skill. After battles, they often recruited enemy engineers, scribes, doctors, even generals, so long as they swore loyalty. A man who once stood against them might now ride beside them, not as a prisoner, but as a trusted voice. This absorption of knowledge made their army stronger. Every battle was not just a test of force, but an opportunity to learn, to adapt, and to grow. Their maps were not like ours. Instead of borders and names, They understood the world in terms of rivers, passes, pastures, and timing. A valley might be known for how quickly sound echoed through it. A hill remembered for how its slope blocked arrows from the west. These were the details that shaped their strategies. They didn't just march toward a city. They circled it, read it, predicted it, and then moved when the moment felt right. To those facing them, this made the Mongols feel supernatural. They arrived when no one expected, fought in ways no one prepared for, and left behind not just defeat, but disorientation. What had just happened? How had it happened so quickly? The battlefield, once clear, now felt like a place where rules didn't apply. And that confusion lingered. It followed survivors back to their homes. It entered the songs and stories passed down. It became part of the myth. But to the Mongols, there was no mystery, just preparation. Years of training, a culture of observation, and above all, patience. They did not rush unless it served the moment. They did not strike unless the target had already begun to fall. Victory was not a surprise. It was the result of choices made long before the fighting began. Now picture that final moment in battle. The dust begins to settle. The sound of hooves fade. Arrows lie scattered like leaves. In the distance, riders regroup, silent as always, already turning to the next horizon. The field is quiet again, but nothing is as it was. Not the land, not the men, not the memory of what just passed through. Chapter 10. The women of the steppe. When people picture the Mongol horde, they often imagine men on horseback bows drawn, wind in their cloaks, galloping across the steppe. But behind every campfire, behind every supply train, every saddle stitched with care, there were women, not hidden, not silent, but active, central, and strong. Mongol women were not left behind during conquest. They moved with it. They helped build it. And they carried its weight just as surely as the warriors they raised and rode beside. Daily life on the steppe was never easy. It demanded constant work. But it was also shared work. Women tended herds, milked mares, prepared meat, and mended clothes. But they also rode, traded, managed camp logistics, and made decisions when the men were away. In times of war, and there were many entire encampments might be left in the hands of women. And they were more than capable of running them. Their homes, called dirs or yurts, were circular, portable structures made from felt and wood. These were not temporary shelters. They were worn, sturdy, and skillfully constructed. Women took the lead in setting them up and taking them down. A single household could pack an entire yurt in under an hour, strap it to an ox or cart, and be on the move by midday. The efficiency of the system kept the Mongols mobile, and the system was run by women. Mothers taught their daughters how to work with wool, how to ferment milk into arag, how to spot illness in livestock, and how to read the sky for weather signs. These were not considered lesser skills. They were essential, respected, and passed down with pride. A woman who knew how to keep a camp running was valued as much as any warrior. The strength of the horde depended on both. Marriage among the Mongols was less about romance and more about alliance. Marriages were arranged to bind clans, settle disputes, and consolidate power. But that didn't mean women were powerless. In many cases, wives were advisors. They managed property, oversaw servants, and acted as ambassadors in their husband's absence. When a Khan rode off to war, it was often his wife who governed in his place. One of the most influential women in Mongol history was Bert, the first wife of Genghis Khan. She was captured by a rival tribe. Early in their marriage, then rescued weeks later. Her survival in return played a major role in Temujin's early rise. Later, she became queen of the empire's western half, ruling vast territories with her own court and authority. Her children became key figures in Mongol expansion, and Her political alliances shaped the future of the dynasty. Other women also held significant sway. Sorgatani Beki, the daughter-in-law of Genghis Khan, was known for her intelligence and diplomacy. After her husband's death, she governed northern China and raised 4 sons, all of whom became rulers, including Kublai Khan. She promoted literacy, religious tolerance, and administrative reform. She did not lead armies, but her influence ran deep and wide. Mongol women were not confined to politics or domestic life. Some fought. There are accounts scattered, sometimes secondhand, of women who rode into battle, who fired arrows, who took up arms to defend their people. The most famous may be Kutulun, a warrior princess and great-great-granddaughter of Genghis Khan. She demanded that any man who wished to marry her first defeat her in a wrestling match. None succeeded. She reportedly won dozens of matches and remained unmarried for years. Her reputation was so strong that she became a symbol of strength across Central Asia. The Mongol respect for women came not from ideology, but from necessity. Life on the steppe was hard. If someone could pull their weight, they were valued. Gender mattered less than skill, and that mindset filtered into policy. Genghis Khan's laws offered women legal protections unusual for the time. Widows could inherit property. Women could initiate divorce. Female advisors were present in court. None of this made the society equal by modern standards, but it was strikingly progressive for its era. Religion played a part in this balance too. The Mongols followed a mix of shamanism and animism, which included female spirits and deities. Women served as shamans, spiritual leaders who performed rituals, interpreted dreams, and mediated between the physical and spirit worlds. In some camps, the most powerful voice was not a general or nobleman, but an elderly shamaness with feathers in her braids and the trust of an entire clan. Even in matters of diplomacy, Mongol women had roles to play. Wives and mothers often acted as emissaries, carrying messages, negotiating marriages, and maintaining alliances across great distances. Their letters have been found in archives far from Mongolia, carefully written in Persian, Chinese, and Arabic testament to a network of female influence that crossed continents. And yet, for all their visibility, Mongol women rarely appear in the grand portraits of empire. Their stories survive in the background in travel logs, diplomatic notes, and family chronicles. Their presence is woven through the fabric of history. But like the felt of their yurts, it wraps around without drawing attention to itself. But if you look closely, they're there, in the rhythm of the camp, in the speed of a meal prepared between migrations, in the order of a caravan ready to move at sunrise, in the quiet strength of a mother watching the horizon while her sons ride off toward war. They held the world together not by command, but by constancy. Picture it now, a wide plain, a small camp rising in the light of dawn, a woman kneeling to stir a pot, another adjusting the wooden frame of a yurt, a child laughing nearby, horses snorting in the cold. There is no ceremony, no spotlight, no grand declaration. Just life, continuing because they make it so. Life on the steppe was not just built on labor and endurance. It was held together by emotion, quiet, constant, often unspoken. Mongol women carried not just the weight of their households, but the unseen pressure of uncertainty. With husbands and sons riding off to distant wars, with no guarantees of their return, the women stayed behind, tending herds, raising children, keeping fires warm through long winters, and never knowing whether the next messenger would bring news of victory or loss. They grieved quietly, often privately, for there was little space for long mourning when survival pressed in from every side. A widow might find herself running an entire clan. A mother might lose 3 sons in a single season and still rise at dawn to milk the mares and repair tack. Their strength did not shout. It did not boast. It appeared in the smallest details. A pot mended with twine. A child's coat refitted from scraps. A decision made before anyone else had the courage to speak. In Mongol society, death came often and swiftly, especially during campaigns. Burial customs were simple, practical, and deeply tied to nature. Women played a central role in these rites. They washed the bodies, wrapped them, murmured blessings, and chose spots where the land seemed most accepting. There were no elaborate tombs for ordinary people, just sky burials or shallow graves, marked only by memory and a few well-placed stones. It was the women who remembered, who pointed out where someone lay years later, who made sure the story did not disappear with the wind. Their understanding of the land ran deeper than the maps drawn by generals. They knew which riverbanks flooded early, which hills caught the morning sun first, which valleys echoed with volfowls in late autumn. This knowledge wasn't taught in schools. It was learned through experience, passed from mother to daughter like a song. Without it, survival was nearly impossible. With it, they moved through the world like they belonged to it and it to them. Traveling merchants who passed through Mongol territories sometimes noted how surprised they were by the authority women held. In the markets, it was not unusual to see a woman bartering fiercely over the price of wool or grain. In diplomatic camps, visitors were received not just by khans, but by their wives or daughters seated beside them, interpreting or commenting without hesitation. To many outsiders, this presence was unexpected. To the Mongols, it was ordinary. Even the stories told around campfires reflected this balance. Epic tales featured not only brave warriors and wise khans, but clever sisters, determined wives, and magical grandmothers. Women in Mongol folklore were not passive. They tricked demons, healed wounds, won races, and solved disputes. These stories were told to children curled beside wool blankets, their little faces pressed against their mother's arms, learning without realizing what kind of world they came from. And when it came time to move, to break camp, to load carts and saddle animals, women directed the rhythm. The camp did not stir until the women stirred. No one ate until they had prepared food. No one rested until the chores were done. This quiet authority ran through every layer of life. Even war could not fully disrupt it. When raids came too close, it was often the women who organized the retreat, who hid the children, who packed valuables into bundles and decided which path would lead to safety. Their instincts were trusted, not questioned. There are quiet records of women who held land in their own names, of wives who defended fortresses when their husbands were away, of matriarchs who mediated between rival clans, preventing bloodshed with little more than words. These were not rare exceptions. They were part of the broader pattern of a society that understood power could come in many forms, not all of them loud. And even in art, though little survives, the presence of women is felt. Carvings show scenes of camp life where women milk horses or cradle infants. Painted scrolls depict women riding with falcons perched on gloved hands. In one Chinese court record, an envoy wrote that Mongol noblewomen were more commanding than their husbands, and often dressed with such severity that one hesitated to meet their eyes. This was not meant as insult. It was simply observation. These were women raised to manage, to command, to act, not because they sought power, but because life required it. Among the most enduring legacies of Mongol women was the preservation of cultural identity. As the empire spread and absorbed new lands, languages, and religions, it was often the women who kept traditions alive. They taught the old songs, maintained clan rituals, passed down the origin stories whispered and felt tense long before cities and palaces appeared. They were the keepers of the invisible threads, the customs, beliefs, and ways of speaking that made a people feel whole, even far from home. Even today, in the remote steppes of Mongolia, you can still find echoes of these women. Nomadic herders whose wives make business decisions, raise children, and drive the herd all at once. Girls who ride bareback at full speed across open plains, laughing into the wind. Grandmothers who know exactly when a storm will hit by how a certain bird moves across the sky. Their lives are quieter now, less ruled by war, but no less shaped by the same patience, resourcefulness, and grit. Let that image settle now in your thoughts. The soft light of dusk stretching across the grasslands. A woman standing at the entrance of her yurt, hands on her hips, surveying the camp as it settles for the night. Her children nearby, her animals grazing calmly, her tools cleaned and ready for morning. There's no need for titles here. Her authority is lived, not claimed. The strength she carries is not loud, but it is real, and it has always been there. Chapter 11. Life under Mongol rule. When the Mongols came, they came fast. One day the sky was clear, the markets open, the wells drawing water. The next, smoke drifted on the wind, and soldiers stood where merchants once bartered. The conquest was swift, often ruthless and final. But conquest was only the beginning. What came after life under Mongol rule was more complex. For those who survived the initial impact, a new way of living began. Not free, not familiar, but stable in its own strange way. In many cities across Asia, the first days after surrender were quiet. Streets were emptied, shops closed, people watched from behind shutters. No one was quite sure what the new rulers would do. But the Mongols did not seek to destroy everything they captured. Once a town or kingdom submitted, they preferred to use it. A functioning city brought taxes. Skilled workers kept armies supplied. Farmers fed the roadways of the empire. Killing was for those who resisted. Those who cooperated were folded into a system that, surprisingly, worked. Taxation was one of the first things people noticed. The Mongols didn't care much for local titles or former allegiances. What they wanted was order and tribute. Each village, town, or district was assessed and assigned a quota. Grain, livestock, silver, silk, whatever a region could offer, it gave. The system was strict, sometimes harsh, but also predictable. And in a world of unpredictable violence, predictability had value. Officials were sent to oversee these matters. Sometimes they were Mongols. Sometimes they were local collaborators who had switched loyalties. These administrators kept detailed records. They tracked harvests, labor, births, and deaths. In places like Persia and northern China, they brought in scholars to help design fair tax systems. The goal was to maintain output without causing collapse. After all, an empty village offered nothing. Trade boomed. For the first time in centuries, it was possible to travel from Eastern Europe to China without crossing a war zone. The Mongols secured routes, punished bandits, and kept mountain passes clear. They offered protection for caravans, even issued documents granting safe passage. Markets swelled with goods from distant lands, Indian spices, Persian textiles, Chinese ceramics. The Silk Road had existed before, but now it pulsed with a new rhythm. And life beneath that current, while not always easy, became richer in flavors, colors, and ideas. But Mongol rule wasn't just about taxes and trade. It touched how people worshipped, learned, and lived. Religion was treated with a kind of calculated tolerance. The Mongols themselves practiced a mix of animism and ancestor worship, but they rarely imposed this on others. Buddhist temples remained open. Muslim mosques called to prayer. Christian churches rang bells at dawn. In some cities, all three stood within walking distance of each other, their clerics nodding politely as they passed. This wasn't out of kindness, it was strategic. The Mongols believed that the gods of different peoples might all be real, and angering them could bring misfortune. So they spread favor like insurance. A donation to a monastery here, an exemption for a church there. In return, religious leaders prayed for the health of the Khan, and their followers were less likely to rebel. Language also shifted. Decrees were written in multiple scripts. Scribes trained in Persian, Uyghur, Chinese, Arabic, and more. A trader from Samarkand might find himself doing business with someone from Beijing, both referencing an edict signed by the same emperor. This multilingual approach allowed the empire to operate across vast distances and cultures. It didn't erase identity. It blurred it gently until everyone could still be who they were, just with new rulers above. Education changed too. The Mongols were not scholars by tradition, but they appreciated skill. In conquered lands, they funded schools, preserved libraries, and brought foreign scientists to court. One Chinese alchemist might be found discussing medicine with an Armenian monk. A Muslim astronomer might chart stars beside a Buddhist historian. These interactions didn't always produce harmony, but they did produce knowledge. And in time, new schools of thought emerged, blending East and West, North and South, into something entirely new. Still, there were limits. Freedom under the Mongols did not mean equality. Conquered people had to obey. Rebellion, even rumored, was met with swift punishment. Some cities that dared to rise again were razed entirely, their names erased from records. The threat of destruction hovered like smoke, always faint in the distance. You could pray, you could trade, you could live, but never forget who ruled the land. And yet, beneath the fear, life continued. Children played in courtyards, oblivious to the weight of banners above. Farmers tilled fields, as they had for generations. Artisans carved wood and wove cloth. Stories were told at night, some praising the Khan's wisdom, others whispering older legends when no officials were near. People adapted, as they always do. The old ways folded into the new, creating a patchwork that was neither fully Mongol nor fully native, but something in between. In some cases, this blending lasted long after the Mongols were gone. Cities once conquered became trade hubs. Roads built by their engineers remained open. Laws introduced by their scribes became tradition. Even in decline, the structure they built lingered, like the memory of a dream too vivid to forget. Now imagine you are one of those living under their rule. You wake at dawn to the sound of your neighbor's animals. You dress, sweep the floor, check the sky for signs of weather. Taxes are due soon. The official will come with his ledgers and guards. You have your grain counted. You say nothing extra, just enough. You bow, not out of fear, but habit. Life under Mongol rule is not your choice, but it is your reality. And reality must be faced, day by day. As the seasons passed under Mongol rule, many people stopped thinking of it as occupation and started thinking of it as the way things simply were. The empire did not vanish after one lifetime. For many, it was the world they were born into, the only one they knew. And like all worlds, it had rules. You learned when to speak and when to stay quiet. You knew which official could be trusted, which one expected bribes, which one listened with his eyes. Markets opened early. Mongol tax collectors didn't enjoy waiting. Stall owners laid out dried fruits, bolts of fabric, bronze trinkets, and jars of fermented milk. Coins clinked. Weights were measured. And across the stalls, languages mingled. A Turkic trader greeted a Chinese buyer while a Persian accountant recorded a debt. The empire, for all its scars, had connected places that once seemed impossibly far apart. Now they spoke to each other daily, even if only through the slow, careful rhythm of trade. In rural areas, the changes were quieter. Peasants still planted their grains, still raised their goats, still whispered to the wind before the first cut of harvest. But now they paid tribute to someone far away, a name they might never say aloud, a face they'd never see. Mongol riders came twice a year, sometimes more, to collect taxes or deliver new orders. Most villagers learned not to ask questions. Compliance brought peace. Hesitation brought suspicion. Some Mongol officers were fair, others cruel. There were stories, true or embellished, of entire villages uprooted for minor delays in payment. But there were also tales of protection. Mongol enforcers chasing off bandits, rebuilding bridges, or intervening in local disputes when no one else would. They were not loved, but they were respected. That, in the minds of the Khan's court, was enough. In cities like Karakoram, Dadu, and Samarkand, imperial administrators lived in homes designed to impress. Tall gates, painted beams, courtyards lined with rare plants. But many of these administrators were not Mongol. They were Persian viziers, Chinese engineers, Arab astronomers. Genghis Khan had once declared that wisdom belonged to no one people. His successors followed that belief, not as idealists, but as pragmatists. They used the best minds they could find, no matter where those minds were born. And so the empire felt strangely plural. The law might be written Mongol, but it was explained in Persian. The tax ledger might be Uyghur, but the coins used were minted with Chinese characters. The result was a kind of harmony not born of peace, but of overlap. You learned to live with your neighbors. You borrowed words from their tongue, recipes from their kitchen, prayers from their holidays. Slowly, the sharp edges between cultures wore down. This blurring was not always welcomed. Some resisted quietly. Old holidays were celebrated in secret. Stories from the time before were told in low voices. Resistance did not always look like rebellion. Sometimes it looked like memory. A grandmother repeating the lullabies her mother had sung. A craftsman carving patterns that once held sacred meaning, now just decoration in the eyes of the law. Still, there were opportunities. Talented people, regardless of class, could rise. A boy from a farming family might learn to read Uyghur script and become a clerk. A girl skilled in numbers could manage a merchant's books and earn respect. The Mongols were not invested in hereditary privilege. They valued loyalty, results, and the ability to serve the system. For some, this opened doors that had been sealed for generations. But none of this erased the weight of the past. In every town touched by Mongol conquest, there were empty buildings, homes where no one returned, stones blackened by fire, a well that no one used because of what had once been thrown inside. These were not the kinds of memories written in chronicles. They were held in gestures and silences, in the way someone might stop talking as a patrol passed by. The empire was also a network of control. Watchtowers dotted major routes. Fortified outposts guarded borders. Spies moved silently across provinces, listening for unrest. Sometimes it felt like the wind carried ears. A careless word spoken too loud in the wrong tavern might bring questions. And questions often came with consequences. People learned to measure their words, to keep opinions soft, to smile when spoken to, and never to ask why an old neighbor was no longer seen. Yet the Mongols rarely ruled through direct occupation. Their presence was heavy, but not constant. Local leaders were kept in place if they obeyed. Cultural customs were allowed to continue if they posed no threat. There was, in most cases, a kind of uneasy autonomy. Life resembled what it had been, but watched, taxed, and quietly reshaped. Art under Mongol rule reflected this duality. Painters continued their work, but themes shifted. A Chinese scroll might now depict a Mongol noble alongside a dragon. A Persian manuscript might include steppe landscapes no local had ever seen. Poets wrote in older forms, but with newer subjects. The empire did not suppress creativity. It redirected it. And even time changed. Calendars were revised. New festivals declared. But in kitchens and prayer halls, the old timings remained. People still planted by the moon, still counted days between winter feasts. The Mongols had conquered lands, but they had not yet conquered rhythm. That perhaps was the most enduring resistance of all. As generations passed, children were born who had never known anything else. They grew up hearing Mongol words alongside their native tongue. They played with coins stamped with a Khan's name. They prayed in temples untouched by war, but funded by empire. For them, the question was not what had been lost, but what it meant to belong in a world so wide. Imagine now a small home in a dusty village. A woman grinding millet, a man repairing a cart, their son practicing letters with a borrowed stylus. Outside, the wind picks up. Hooves in the distance. Maybe a tax officer. Maybe a messenger. No one hurries. The cart must be fixed. The food must be made. Whatever empire governs today, the work remains the same. Chapter 12. Feasting in a Khan's yurt. Imagine the day ending on the steppe. The wind softens. The sky shifts from pale blue to gold. Inside the royal camp, all is still. For now. But at the heart of it all, a large yurt stands, a circle of thick felt and lattice work. Its wooden door painted red and edged in gold. Smoke curls from a chimney hole. Inside, the Khan prepares to host a feast. This is not a celebration for common joy. It is a formal event, part ritual, part politics, part performance. These gatherings were rare and deliberate, and when they happened, they meant something. The arrival of foreign guests, the swearing of loyalty, the victory in a campaign, all of these could mark the beginning of a feast. The interior of the yurt feels like another world. Thick carpets insulate the floor. Woolen wall hangings line the interior, woven with horsemen, tigers, mountains. The light comes from oil lamps and a central hearth. The air is warm with the scent of roasting meat, sweet fermented milk, wood smoke, and wool. Seating follows strict order. At the northern end, directly opposite the door, sits the Khan himself. His throne is not golden, not overly ornate. A wide cushion, a raised platform, furs draped behind. He wears a robe of deep blue or maroon, trimmed in sable, his hair tied neatly, a blade tucked into his sash, not for use, but for presence. To his right and left, his closest advisors, military commanders, older brothers, trusted wives. Beyond them, provincial governors. Farther down the circle, foreign envoys. Then craftsmen, healers, scribes. Everyone knows their place, and no one dares shift from it. Even in celebration, hierarchy stands tall. Before food is served, there are toasts. These are not loud or drunken. They are solemn. The cup is raised with both hands, eyes lower. A few words are spoken of ancestors, of the Khan's greatness, of the eternal blue sky that watches over them all. Sometimes a blessing. Sometimes a memory of someone lost in the last campaign. Then the drinking begins. Cold, sharp, slightly sour. It burns a little going down. The cup is passed clockwise. No one refuses. To do so would be disrespectful. Even the foreign guests, unused to the taste, accept it politely. Then the food arrives. Platter after platter, carried by servants in wool tunics. Boiled mutton, the staple. Fatty, heavy, filling. Roasted lamb ribs, charred on the outside, soft at the center. Horse meat sausages. Steamed dumplings stuffed with onion and meat. Salted curds, hard and dry. Bowls of broth so rich it shines with a layer of grease. There are no forks. You eat with your hands or with the knives at your belt. For the honored guests, the Khan may offer special cuts, the head of the sheep, perhaps, or the fatty tail, considered a delicacy. These gestures are watched closely. To offer the wrong portion to the wrong person would be a grave insult. Every movement in the tent has meaning. While the food is passed, music begins. Not loud drums or dancing. A single horsehead fiddle. Slow, low, mournful. The melody winds through the yurt like smoke, soft enough to allow for speech, deep enough to remind everyone of the vastness of the land outside. Sometimes a singer accompanies, their voice lilting with an almost wordless chant, half song, half prayer. There is conversation, but it is careful. Praise for the Khan, observations about the weather, the health of herds, the behavior of horses. Small, safe topics. And then gradually more serious ones talk of trade routes, of potential alliances, of tensions rising along a border. A feast is not just about food. It is about listening, watching, judging. Every laugh, every pause, every glance is part of the message. The Khan, for his part, says little at first. He watches, he drinks, he listens. His voice, when it comes, is measured. He may ask a question. How fares the Silk Road beyond the Altai? What has been heard from the Sogdians? How are the tribute caravans progressing from China? His tone is neither casual nor harsh. It is deliberate. Every answer matters. As the evening deepens, the atmosphere softens. Faces relax. Bellies fill. More music. A story, perhaps from an old soldier about the time he rode beside Genghis himself. A toast to the ancestors, another round of Arag. Someone laughs too loudly, and for a moment, the tension breaks. But always the form remains. The lines of protocol never vanish. The Khan may rise, signaling that it is time for a gift exchange. Robes are presented woven silks, rare, furs, small statues of silver or jade. The Khan offers gifts as well, often more valuable. A fine horse, a gold pin, a bag of rare herbs. This, too, is strategic. To give more than one receives is to claim the higher place. No guest leaves empty-handed. That would imply rejection, but no one leaves burdened either. The gifts are symbolic. Tokens, promises, perhaps of future loyalty or future judgment. As the final cups are drained and the lamps begin to dim, the Khan may step out into the cold. No words, just a moment in the night air. He looks up at the stars. Behind him, the fire still glows. The music fades. The yurt grows quiet. This is not the end. It is a pause. Tomorrow, the empire moves again. The horses will be saddled. The soldiers will march. But tonight, for this short time, power and peace have shared a table. Let that image settle. The flicker of fire on woolen walls. The gentle breath of horses outside. The hum of voices lowered by custom, not exhaustion. The scent of smoke, fat, milk, and the knowledge that in this place, at this time, history is not written in ink, but lived in the quiet ceremony of eating together.
Outside the yurt, the steppe has gone still. Stars stretch in every direction, countless and close. The only sound is the soft thudding of hooves as night watchmen pass through the camp, their horses breathing slow puffs into the dark. Inside, the warmth lingers. So do the smells, the sharpness of fermented milk, the earthy richness of meat, the faint smoke that clings to wool. The feast is over, but its presence remains. Servants move quietly now. Platters are cleared without clatter. Bowls are gathered carefully stacked. Crumbs swept into the hearth. It's not haste that moves them, but rhythm. It's too as part of the ritual. A good host knows when to end, and a good guest knows when to go. There is no loud farewell, no drunken stumbles. One by one, guests rise, bow, speak a final word of thanks, and exit into the dark. Some will sleep nearby in guest yurts, already warmed for them. Others will travel a short distance, torches bobbing like fireflies on the horizon. All of them carry more than food in their bellies. They carry impressions of generosity, of strength, of unspoken messages exchanged beneath toasts and songs. Inside the Khan's yurt, only a few remain. His closest counsel, his most trusted family. They speak little now. The words have all been said. What's left is shared silence, the kind that doesn't need explanation. The Khan himself sits still, back straight, fingers resting on the rim of his empty cup. He is not just a ruler. In this moment, he is a figure of memory, of order, of legacy yet to be shaped. These feasts, while rare, form the invisible threads of empire. They are not celebrations in the way outsiders understand them. They are instruments, signals, binding agents. They remind vassals of their place. They show potential enemies the weight of Mongol culture, not just its power, but its unity. A unity forged not through walls and palaces, but in the hum of a shared meal, under a roof that can be packed up and moved by dawn. And it's not only politics. There is emotion here too, buried beneath layers of duty. There's pride. That the herders have kept the flock strong enough to feed this table. That the singers still remember the old verses. That the children of the Khan's line sit beside him, learning without being taught. There is grief quietly held. Not every guest who attended the last feast is here tonight. Some fell in the snows of a far campaign. Others faded from favor, disappeared into exile, or simply died on the road. Their places are not mentioned, but their absence is felt. A glance at an empty cushion, a pause in conversation, a toast raised without name. There is hope, too, that peace will last the winter, that trade routes will open by spring, the distant alliances formed with a bowl of soup and a warm robe will hold firm when tested. The feast may end, but its echo continues in decisions, in friendships, in the stories retold by those who sat close to the Khan and dared to speak.
Back in their camps.
Guests discussed the event in low voices. Did you notice the silver ring on his hand? Who sat closest to the fire? Did you hear the hesitation in the envoy's voice? Was the meat served with too much fat or too little? These small details carry meaning. They are read like omens. For in a world where messages cross mountains and oceans, meaning often travels best in memory, and there is another kind of guest, one who speaks less. The old herder invited for his loyalty. The young rider newly appointed to the imperial guard, a scribe from the eastern provinces, unsure why he was chosen. For them, this night becomes a story to carry home, a mark of having been seen. They return with their robes still smelling of fire, their ears echoing with songs, their minds spinning with images they'll try to put into words for those waiting far away. What do they remember most? Not the words, not the meat, but the feeling, the heat of the hearth, the careful order of the cushions, the steady gaze of the Khan as he listened more than he spoke, the sensation of sitting in a space both ancient and immediate, both ceremonial and intimate. These feasts did not happen every week, sometimes not even every season, but when they did, they left marks, not written down but passed in gesture. A certain way of raising a cup, a phrase used only by those who had sat beneath the Khan's roof, a knowledge of how long to pause before speaking, the memory of having once sat very still in a circle of warmth, while the empire watched quietly from every side. As the yurt empties, the fire dies down, the air cools. The Khan finally stands. He steps toward the central hearth, stirs the coals with a metal rod, and watches them spark faintly. His breath is slow. This was not just a meal. It was a message. One he crafted with every glance, every silence, every invitation and omission. It has been sent. It will spread now, on horseback and whisper, carried by the people who shared the space. Outside, The guards stand like shadows. The horses are calm. The banners do not move. The stars wheel silently overhead. And inside, the Khan's yurt settles into quiet. Not emptiness, not loneliness, just quiet. Quiet that holds meaning. That says, we gathered, we remembered, we promised. And now, we rest. Let your mind stay there for a while. In the fading warmth of the hearth, in the scent of roasted meat and wool, in the last notes of the fiddle, still ringing softly in your ears. The Empire may ride again tomorrow, for tonight it is still.
Chapter 30. The Fall of a Khan. The news comes quietly. It does not travel with drums or banners. It comes in whispers, in the sudden stillness of a messenger's arrival, in the way guards stand a little closer to their lords. The Khan is dead. Not many saw him die. Perhaps it happened during a hunt, or after a long illness. Maybe it was in a distant camp, with only his closest circle around him. No one knows the exact details. And if they do, they are not eager to share. In Mongol tradition, the death of a great leader is not to be shouted. It is to be held in silence, guarded, wrapped like a valuable relic until the time is right. Inside the royal yurt, the body lies still. Wrapped in layers of thick felt, his face is hidden, his sword laid across his chest. Around him, the air is heavy. There's no crying, no wailing, not yet. Only a deep, pressing stillness. The kind that stretches long past the moment itself. Outside, word begins to spread. Couriers ride in from far provinces. Noble families gather with unreadable expressions. Advisors sit in council tents for hours, speaking in low tones, weighing every word. This is not just a time of mourning. It is a time of danger. The Mongol Empire is built on movement, loyalty, and power. But power must have a face. And now, the face has vanished. When a Khan dies, the empire does not stop. Armies keep marching. Traders keep trading. But everyone waits, not openly, but with a shared tension that lives just beneath the skin of daily life. Who will take his place? There is no clear answer. Succession among the Mongols is not inherited in a straight line. It is not as simple as the oldest son becoming the next ruler. Instead, it is a balance of blood, strength, and backing. Brothers, sons, nephews, even trusted generals, all might lay claim. Each believes they hold the right, and some are willing to prove it with steel. The imperial family is summoned. Caravans arrive carrying wives, sons, commanders, and scribes. Some come quickly, others delay. Each arrival shifts the air. Each new tent raised in the camp is a signal. Alliances are built not with declarations, but with where one chooses to sit. A bow given too slowly. A greeting held too long. A cousin who pretends not to see another cousin passing by. Meanwhile, the people wait. Farmers continue to sow. Merchants open their stalls, but they watch carefully. They watch the flags, the movement of soldiers, the colors worn by passing riders. One wrong shift, and peace could fracture. The most dangerous time in any empire is not when enemies approach from outside. It is when brothers begin to look at each other too long. Inside the council tent, the highest-ranking nobles begin to meet. They speak in formal tones. They refer to the late Khan as if he still lives out of respect, out of caution. His name is not spoken casually. His deeds are recited how he led the Western campaigns, how he honored the traditions of Genghis, how he upheld the law of the steppe. But behind each speech, calculations are made. Who commands the largest army? Who controls the flow of trade in the East? Which alliances through marriage might hold strong? Which might break? One prince is bold. He claims lineage, blood, and experience. Another is quiet, but his words are sharp. A third avoids the meetings altogether and instead hosts his own feasts in a separate corner of the camp, letting others come to him. He says little, but those who leave his yurt speak of promises, of loyalty, of plans already made. The rituals continue. The late Khan's horse is led around his tent. Offerings are burned fat, wool, herbs. Shamans chant low and long into the night. The stars are watched for signs. If an eagle flies overhead at dawn, it is said to be his spirit departing. But still no name is spoken. Not yet. For to name the next Khan is to choose a future. And in an empire stretched across rivers, deserts, and mountains, the future must be chosen carefully. For the common people, this time feels like being caught between breaths. They work, they pray, they avoid speaking too openly in inns or market squares. Everyone knows someone whose life was changed during the last succession. A town favored, a cousin lost, a caravan attacked by men once called brothers. Sometimes a name will surface, spoken by a traveling monk or whispered by a trader returning from the capital. It will be the younger son, someone says. He has the support of the Western generals. But someone else shakes their head. No, the widow favors her nephew. She has many friends still loyal to her husband's memory. And just like that, uncertainty returns. Back in the heart of the imperial camp, preparations are made for the Kurultai, the Great Council. This is where the next Khan will be chosen. Every major figure must be present. No decision can be made until the gathering is full. Some invitees travel for weeks. Others claim illness or delay, buying time for their own ambitions to grow. The Kurultai is a moment of performance. Not just politics, but posture, costume, expression. A man who arrives with too many guards appears insecure. One who arrives alone appears either bold or foolish. Every detail is read, interpreted, judged. As the sun dips behind the hills, the council tent is lit from within. Outside, guards stand silent. Inside, the fate of the empire leans in one direction, then another, like a bull balanced on a saddle horn. Just one word, one mistake could tip it. The people outside the tent do not hear these words, but they feel the weight in how long the discussions stretch, in who leaves the tent first, in whether music plays at night or whether the camp stays quiet. And so the empire waits once more. The morning of the Kurultai arrives without fanfare. There is no trumpet, no call to assembly. Instead, figures begin to gather as the sky brightens, moving quietly toward the central tent. Thick carpets have been laid on the ground. The cold clings to boots and beards, but no one shows discomfort. This is not a place for emotion. Inside, the structure is spacious and dimly lit. Smoke from the hearth drifts upward, catching the light in long ribbons. The nobles sit in a wide circle, robes of sable and fox fur, belts weighed down with carved knives, hands clasped. Faces unreadable. There is no stage, no throne. The power in this room does not sit above others. It sits among them. That is the way of the steppe. One elder rises. His voice is slow, cracked, but carries weight. He speaks of the Khan who has passed his victories, his justice, his moments of mercy. No name is mentioned yet. The air is still. Another rises, then another. Their speeches are not loud, but deliberate. Each one plants a flag of allegiance, carefully hidden in compliments and memories. Each one draws invisible lines through the room. Finally, a younger man stands. His robe is simple. His voice is clear. He does not speak long. He speaks of unity, of the need to move forward. He ends with a phrase used only in great moments. The sky has emptied its eagle. Let us not leave the nest open. That is as close to a nomination as anyone will get. Then the silence returns. What follows is not a vote in the way most understand it. It is a weighing, a watching, a feeling. The room leans, not physically, but politically. Heads turn toward one man more often than the others. Eyes narrow when another shifts. Subtle gestures, how long someone takes to refill their cup, whether they speak first or we carry meaning. Finally, an agreement begins to take shape. Slowly, like snow melting, a name is spoken cautiously by a respected general. Another echoes it, then another. Each time it's said, the weight behind it grows. There are no cheers, no applause. Just a quiet nod from the man who has now been chosen. He bows his head once deeply. The ritual is done. But the danger is not everyone agrees. Some nod out of fear, others out of exhaustion. There are those who leave the tent with tight jaws, already considering how to resist quietly, or when to act later. The steppe is wide and loyalty stretches thin when tested. The new Khan does not celebrate. He calls a smaller meeting that night. He speaks to his generals, his scribes, his kin. He issues his first orders. Some are simple gifts for the families of the fallen, fresh supplies for key outposts. Others are heavier reassignments of military command. Calls for new tribute from hesitant provinces. Quiet reminders to distant cousins that the eyes of the empire have not dimmed. The body of the previous Khan is prepared for burial. There's no public ceremony. His grave, like that of Genghis himself, will be hidden. The procession leaves before dawn with only a handful of riders. They carry his body wrapped in felt, his favorite bow and saber beside him, a bag of soil from the plains he conquered tied to the saddle. No one follows. No one asks where they go. As the sun rises higher, the camp begins to change. New banners are sewn. Riders paint fresh symbols on their shields. Messengers are dispatched in every direction, bearing the news not just of a death, but of a continuity. The empire has a leader again. Orders will resume. Taxes must be paid. Borders will be watched. Still, the people remain watchful. A new Khan means new favors, new punishments, new patterns. Some families will rise. Others may vanish. Soldiers polish their armor a little more carefully. Traders weigh their words before haggling. Even musicians change their songs, subtly shifting tone to reflect the new voice at the top. But the past lingers. Around hearth fires at night, elders recall other transitions. Stories of the sons of Genghis, of betrayals and broken promises, of swift revenge masked in polite language. A tale of a cousin who spoke too openly and was never seen again. These stories are not warnings, they are memories, passed down to remind listeners that even in stability, the winds of the steppe do not rest. The new Khan travels to the sacred mountain a few weeks later. Alone, except for his personal guard, he makes offerings at the shrine. He bows to the eternal blue sky. He whispers a promise to the spirit of his ancestor, asking for strength, for vision, for the patience to wait and the speed to strike. There, at the edge of the world, surrounded by wind and sky, he becomes more than a man. He becomes a symbol. He returns change, not in appearance, not in speech, but in weight. Those who see him afterwards say his footsteps sound firmer, that his silences have shape, that when he looks at someone, they look away first, yet he knows the truth. That rule is not guaranteed. That empires do not rest on ceremony, but on vigilance. That what he gained in whispers can be lost in shouts. And that every choice from here forward will echo farther than he can see. In time, people will forget how uncertain those days were. They will remember only the outcome, the name, the years that followed. But in this moment, the ground still feels uneven, and somewhere far from the capital, in a village not yet visited by the new Khan's taxmen, an old man shakes his head and says, "It is not the death of a Khan that matters. It is who chooses to ride afterward." The yurt has been packed away. The banner shifted. The voice at the top has changed. But the empire rides on. Chapter 14. The eternal steppe. The empire may have crumbled, but the steppe remains. It stretches outward, vast and unchanged, a sea of grass without end. The same wind that once whipped against the faces of Genghis Khans still blows across the plains. The same stars hang overhead at night, uncounted and close. And somewhere, in the folds of that great openness, a small family packs up their yurt before the sun rises. There are no monuments here, no marble statues or grand arches. The memory of empire lives not in stone, but in rhythm. In the way tents are pitched with the door facing south. In the method of lashing wooden lattice walls with sinew. In the sound of a two-stringed fiddle played over coals in the quiet hour before dawn. It lives in movement. The family's horses wait nearby, breath steaming in the early chill. Their wool-lined saddles are worn but cared for. A boy ties bundles of firewood. A girl secures the felt roof with practiced hands. The older woman, her cheeks burned by wind and sun, prepares a pot of tea, salty, thick, and steaming. Her husband checks the sheep, counting without needing to look directly. Each step is purposeful, repeated thousands of times across generations. This is what remains. The Mongol legacy is not just in conquest or maps. It's in the enduring culture of people who never sought to settle behind walls. For them, stability doesn't mean permanence. It means balance between grass and herd, between movement and pause, between memory and need. They do not read history books. They tell stories instead. Around the fire, the grandfather speaks of the time his own father rode to the high pastures alone at 12 years old. Of the time a white horse refused to cross a stream and saved a cousin from a flash flood. Of the star that appeared the night a child was born and was later seen again when a beloved uncle passed. Sometimes the names of Khans come up, not in reverence, but in familiarity, as if they were relatives. Genghis, Hulagu, Kublai spoken not with awe, but with a calm acceptance that they were once here and now are not. Just as the seasons return, just as the rivers freeze and thaw, what matters more than who ruled is how to endure. In the steppe, time moves differently. The days are governed by light and herd. The years measured by how many lambs survived, how long the rains lasted. A good year brings thick wool, fat animals, easy births. A bad year means hard rides, water carried long distances, the loss of weak foals. There's pride in surviving both. Even now, long after the height of Mongol power, nomads cross the same paths used by ancient caravans. Sometimes, in the dust, they find a piece of metal, a rusted horseshoe, a blade edge. They don't keep them. They place them on stones or leave them tucked into a tree's roots. Let others find them. Let the land hold what it remembers. Not everything is old. Solar panels rest on wooden posts. Radios crackle with distant voices. Motorbikes sometimes join the herd, their riders wearing thick robes and mirrored sunglasses. But the heart of it remains the same. Camp, move, live lightly. Listen to the land. In the spring, the grass returns like a promise. Hills go from brown to deep green in days. Foals are born unsteady and strong. The rivers rise clear and cold. This is when the riders smile more often, when the elders sing longer at night, when even the dogs seem to sleep more soundly. Young people leave sometimes. They go to the city for school or work. They learn new trades. But many return. Not always right away, but eventually. Something pulls at them, not guilt, but gravity, the smell of the air after rain, the silence that speaks more than noise ever could. The memory of sitting beside a fire with no agenda, just warmth. The eternal steppe is not a place frozen in time. It is alive, changing with each season, each generation. But It does not forget. It carries the imprint of hooves, the weight of history, the echo of voices long gone, and it welcomes those who remember how to move with it, not against it. In the heart of the steppe, an old herder lifts his eyes to the sky. He sees the same moon Genghis saw, feels the same wind, hears the same silence when the fire dies low. He does not speak of empires. He speaks of tomorrow's weather, of where the grass is thickest, of when to ride again. Let your mind rest there for a moment, in the saddle of a steady horse, with the breeze brushing your cheek. No roads, no clocks, no noise. Just the endless hum of life lived without borders, where every day begins with the sun and ends with stars, and the land remembers all who passed. As the fire inside the yurt dims, stories continue, spoken in low voices, as the stars lean in closer. The same stories told centuries ago are spoken still not word for word, but in spirit, of a people who never stayed still for too long, who measured their worth not by land owned, but by how far they could ride, how well they could read the wind, and how deeply they honored their dead. These were not just warriors. They were weavers of movement, of silence, of space. Across the plains, the footprints of empires have faded, but the way of life that shaped them lingers in the habits of those still moving beneath the wide sky. No longer do armies thunder across Asia, but there are still families who rise before dawn, boil tea, and load their world onto a cart before the dew has dried from the grass. Their world is smaller now, perhaps quieter, but it holds the same bones, the same pulse. There are no textbooks written in these camps, but lessons are everywhere. In how to train a horse with only a glance and a tug, in how to find water in the wind scent, in how to show respect without speaking. A child learns not by being told, but by watching, by riding, by falling and rising again without complaint. And while the rest of the world builds, upward cities stacked with glass and steel, the nomads of the steppe still build outward. Their homes do not scrape the sky, but breathe with the land. Their roofs don't hold satellite dishes, but open to the stars. They do not resist the weather. They live with it. Even in cities like Ulaanbaatar, the spirit of the steppe walks quietly. In markets, older women in traditional robes bargain next to businessmen in suits. On apartment balconies, families dry meat in the autumn sun, just as their ancestors did. And on holidays, thousands return to the plains for festivals, wrestling, archery, horse racing, not just games, but reminders. That what was never left. The eternal steppe is not only geography, it's identity. For centuries, outsiders tried to define Mongols by their conquests, by the borders they broke, the cities they took, the maps they redrew. But ask a herder what it means to be Mongol, and he will not speak of battle. He will speak of the herd, of the land, of how to survive winter, of how to honor the sky. This deep connection to land over law, to motion over monument, is not easily understood by those born behind walls. But for the steppe-born, it is as natural as breath. Freedom is not the right to choose where to go. It is the refusal to be still for too long. Home is not a house. It's wherever the fire is built that night. In time, even empires must fall. Stones crumble. Crowns are forgotten. But culture, when it lives in the body, in the hand, in the walk, and the gaze, survives. Because it does not need approval. It does not need preservation in glass. It simply continues. A modern Mongol may ride a motorcycle instead of a horse. He may carry a phone, wear ported boots, speak 3 languages. But when the road ends and the hills rise, he still knows how to follow the stars, how to find shelter in a storm, how to move with the land, not against it. There is strength in that, a quiet strength. The kind that doesn't shout, the kind that doesn't need to be seen to endure. And so the steppe goes on through drought and snow, through empire and independence, through centuries of change. It remains still wide, still silent, still holding the memory of hoofbeats and fires and songs that echoed so long ago. Its people, fewer now, still carry the rhythm of that past in how they greet strangers, in how they fold their blankets, in how they never waste a step. Even the horses remember. They move differently here. Their hooves strike the ground with memory. They know the trails their ancestors once ran, and they follow without maps. They pause at rivers where ancient armies crossed. They lift their heads when the wind shifts, not in fear, but recognition. This chapter of history was never just about conquest. It was about how to live in a world without fences, how to carry everything you need and nothing more, how to belong to a place without owning it, how to trust your people, your animals, your sky. As you lay back now, imagine yourself under that same sky. A soft roll fell under your head. The wind brushing through the grass outside, a horse snorting nearby. The fire inside the yurt has gone quiet, but its warmth remains. The stars above you are ancient, patient. There's no rush, no noise. Just the land and you and the long breath of history settling into sleep. The Mongol Empire has passed, but its rhythm continues in song, in step, in silence. The eternal steppe still watches, still waits, still whispers. Rest now. We've traveled far. And now, as our journey comes to a close, the dust of the steppe settles behind us. We've traveled far, tracing hoof prints through frost-covered grasslands, riding alongside couriers beneath open skies, listening quietly at the edge of yurts while songs and politics mingled over steaming bowls of fermented milk. You've witnessed lives built not on stone, but on movement, not measured in monuments, but in miles ridden and winters survived. You began at the edge of a camp in the half-light of dawn, where the cold wind pressed against belt walls and the first fires of morning were struck with practiced hands. You watched as woolen tents folded like memory, and entire families loaded their world onto carts, guided by horses who remembered the path better than any map ever could. You moved with them, feeling the rhythm of a people who never stopped long enough for time to settle over them. You tasted what they tasted. The tang of fermented Mare's milk, the chew of dried curd, the warmth of fatty mutton boiled until the bones loosened. Not delicacies in any palace, but fuel for riders who might travel 100 miles in a day and sleep in the saddle. Meals stripped to their essence, born of need and endurance, never luxury. You saw how children were shaped by this world, not coddled, but carved into it by the elements and expectations. At 4 or 5, they rode their first horses. By 10, they could fire a bow while galloping. Their play was practice. Their games were training. Each fall a lesson, each scar a story. You witnessed a raid unfold, from silent approach to sudden eruption. It was not chaos, it was craft. A language of signals and motion where every rider knew when to vanish, when to strike, when to leave no trace behind. And when the dust cleared, the world was never quite the same. You entered the great cities only to see them fall. You stood in the ruins of Baghdad, where once there were libraries and gardens, now only silence and ash. But even in that silence, you felt the weight of change, the turning of one age into another, marked not by speeches, but by fire. You followed the messengers of empire, men who rode without rest across rivers, deserts, and mountains, carrying the words of Khans faster than thought. And you learned that even among warriors, the pen, or at least the seal, was held with reverence. Orders, trade, maps, marriages, all depended on that relentless rhythm of hooves. You listened as the laws of Genghis were spoken, harsh and final, justice that knew no hesitation. Death punished without trial, loyalty demanded without question. But inside that severity was a structure, a code, a belief that law, even brutal law, could bind a world too wide for walls. You followed rumors through the high grasses and forested edges, where voices spoke of the place where Genghis Khan may lie. A tomb no one has found, a resting place sealed by blood and oath. You felt how legends outlive even the fiercest names, how mystery becomes its own form of memory. You studied the science of Mongol war, not just in strength, but in illusion. The feints, the withdrawals, the traps laid like thread across a plain. Warfare not of noise, but of knowledge. Their enemies saw them only when it was too late. You met the women of the steppe, not veiled or silenced, but riding, commanding, trading. You heard how they held empires together when the men rode out, how they kept the fires lit, the herds alive, the children taught, warriors in a different key. You lived through the uncertainty of succession when a Khan falls and silence spreads like frost. When names are spoken in circles, not rows, and power is a shape, not a seat. When even the strongest empire must hold its breath and listen for the wind's direction. And then you followed that wind back out into the steppe that never ends. You saw that even after empires fade, a way of life can remain. That the yurt still stands. That children still race horses under the same sky. That the fire is still lit every night with the same quiet purpose. That history does not have to be written to be remembered. What you've witnessed was not just the story of conquest. It was the story of survival, of a people who lived without anchors, who believed the sky was sacred and the land was to be shared, who measured time not in reigns or centuries, but in seasons and migrations, and who, even in a modern world, have not forgotten how to move with it. So now, as the last echoes of hooves drift off into the quiet distance, allow yourself to rest. You don't need to remember every name or date. Let the details blur gently, like mist on the morning grass. What remains is the feeling, that sense of open space, of endless possibility, of rhythm over rush. You've traveled not just across time, but into the lives of those who left little behind, yet shaped the world with their absence of stillness. The stars above the steppe still shine. The horses still graze. The yurts are still warm with fire and story. You are safe now, far from the cold and wind, wrapped in there is nothing more to learn tonight. No more roads to follow, only rest. Let the memory of the eternal steppe carry you gently into sleep. Thank you for drifting through time with us. If you enjoyed this quiet journey into the Mongol world, you'll find many more waiting here. Subscribe to the Drowsy Historian for more slow, immersive stories from the past told, just the way history should be, softly, patiently, and without hurry. Until next time, rest well and let the echoes of history lull you to sleep. Good night.